Welcome, welcome. You're here at Vision Harry. Today we present to you, what if Gringotts Goblins scanned Harry at age 7 and found 47 memory charms Dumbledore used to hide his parents' real personalities. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Weight of Forgetting. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not the Hogwarts letter, that was still 4 years away, but a stiff cream envelope with a wax seal pressed into deep burgundy, bearing the image of a key crossed over a sword. The address was written in sharp, angular script that looked less like handwriting and more like something had been carved into the paper. Mr. Harry J. Potter, the smallest bedroom 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Vernon Dursley intercepted it at the door, as he intercepted everything. He turned it over twice, squinted at the seal, and made the sound he always made when something didn't fit neatly into his understanding of the world, a low, wet grunt somewhere between dismissal and unease. Who's sending letters to him? Petunia appeared at his shoulder, drying her hands on a dish towel, her neck craned in that particular way she had, like a bird of prey that had learned to dress itself in cardigans. Vernon said nothing. He tucked the letter into the breast pocket of his suit jacket. Harry, who was 7 years old and had learned very early that the best survival strategy in this house was to be less noticeable than the furniture, watched this from the kitchen doorway. He'd been told to scrub the breakfast dishes before school. His hands were still damp. He noted the letter, noted where it went, and said nothing. He finished the dishes. He went to school. He came home. That night, when the house was dark and Dudley's snoring rolled down the hall like distant thunder, Harry slipped out of his cupboard and retrieved the letter from Vernon's jacket, which hung on the coat rack by the front door like a deflated version of the man himself. The wax seal broke cleanly. Inside was a single sheet, the same cream stock as the envelope, covered in that same carved-looking script. To Mr. Harry James Potter, you are hereby formally notified that the estate of Potter, Vault 687, subsidiary Vaults 688 through 691, and all associated properties, bonds, and magical artifacts, has been placed under administrative review by Gringotts Bank, London, pending resolution of the Potter inheritance claim filed on the 1st of November, 1981. As the sole living heir and the account's primary beneficiary, your presence is required at Gringotts for a formal heritage assessment, as mandated under Goblin Banking Law, Statute 14, Clause 7. This assessment is not optional. Failure to appear within 30 days of this notice will result in the automatic transfer of administrative control of the Potter estate to the designated secondary trustee. Your appointment has been scheduled for Saturday, the 14th of June, 1987, at 10 a.m. Bring this letter. Ragnarok, Director, Gringotts Bank, London. Harry read it 3 times. He didn't understand most of it. Subsidiary vaults meant nothing to him, inheritance claim even less. What he understood was the part about sole living heir, because that meant the letter was for him and nobody else, and designated secondary trustee, which had the kind of phrasing that made something cold settle at the bottom of his stomach. He put the letter back in the envelope, went back to his cupboard, and lay on his cot staring at the slanted ceiling 2 feet above his face. He had a vault. His parents had left him a vault. And apparently someone else was in charge of it. Saturday was 4 days away. Harry had never been to London. He thought about this for a while. Then he thought about the loose brick behind the garden shed where he kept the £2.37 he'd collected in dropped change over the past year and a half. Then he thought about the 7:42 train from Little Whinging to Waterloo, which he knew about because he'd overheard Vernon complaining about it to the neighbour. He was small for his age and he had his mother's eyes, which he knew only because it was the one thing Petunia had ever said about him that wasn't a complaint. He fell asleep still thinking about it. Not anxiously, more like he was working through a puzzle, and the puzzle was interesting. Getting to London turned out to be easier than expected and harder than it should have been. The £2.37 was exactly enough for the bus to the station and not enough for the train. Harry spent a few minutes outside the station considering his options, and then he noticed a woman dropping a £5 note from her purse and not realizing it, and he picked it up, and then he spent a moment thinking about whether to run after her, and then he noticed she was already through the station doors and boarding a train going in the opposite direction. He bought his ticket. He told himself he'd find a way to pay it back someday, which he believed because believing it felt better than not believing it, and he'd learned early that the things you believe about yourself tend to become true one way or another. The train to Waterloo took 43 minutes. London arrived outside the window like a sudden argument, loud, layered, overflowing with people who all seemed to know exactly where they were going. Harry had the letter and his 2 remaining pounds and a sense of direction that had always been quietly reliable even when everything else in his life was not. He found a tube map. He found the station. He found the street. Diagon Alley was invisible to him at first, just a grimy pub wedged between a music shop and a broken-windowed bookstore, the kind of place that seemed to be actively hoping no one would look at it. Harry stood in front of it for a moment, letter in hand, and then he pushed the door open because the address on the letter said Gringotts, Diagon Alley, and this was the only place that matched any description he'd been able to find of anything. The leaky cauldron went quiet when he walked in. Not the dramatic silence of recognition, he was 7, unremarkable in his oversized clothes and taped-up glasses, but the smaller silence of adults registering a child alone in a pub and not quite deciding what to do about it. An old barman with no hair and a kind face leaned across the bar. "You lost, son." "I have an appointment," Harry said, and held up the letter. The barman, Tom, his name was Tom, there was a sign, looked at the seal and his expression did something complicated. He came around the bar without another word, led Harry to the back, and tapped a sequence of bricks in the courtyard wall with a gnarled finger. The wall folded itself open like a curtain pulled aside. Harry's first sight of Diagon Alley was pure, unprocessed wonder. The colors were wrong for England, too vivid, too layered, and the sounds were wrong too, full of things he couldn't name and didn't try to. An owl sat on a post and watched him with the concentrated attention of a professor. A cart full of what appeared to be bottled lightning rattled past. A child 2 years older than him stood outside a shop window with his mouth open, pointing at a broomstick that was rotating slowly on a display stand. Harry walked through all of it like he was late for something. Gringotts rose at the end of the alley like it had been there since before the alley decided to exist, white as bone, tall as a threat, its bronze doors flanked by goblins in uniforms who watched visitors with the particular expression of people who have seen every kind of human nonsense and been unimpressed by all of it. Harry walked up the steps. One of the goblins looked down at him. "Appointment," Harry said, and offered the letter. The goblin took it, read it in approximately 1 second, and handed it back. "Director Ragnarok's office. 2nd floor, East Wing. Bother anyone else and you'll be escorted out." "Right," Harry said. He went inside. The interior of Gringotts was the first place Harry had ever been that felt serious. Not intimidating the way the Dursley house was intimidating, which was more about the absence of warmth than the presence of anything genuine. Gringotts felt serious the way a very old library feels serious, like it had been built by people who understood that some things mattered enormously and had arranged their architecture accordingly. The ceiling was high enough that the top of it was just ambient gold light. The marble floors were busy with witches and wizards in robes, some hurrying, some waiting, all of them conducting business with the particular focus of people who understood that goblins did not enjoy having their time wasted. The goblins themselves sat behind a long counter, working with ledgers and scales and instruments Harry couldn't identify, each one moving with the compact efficiency of something that had never once doubted what it was doing. He found the 2nd floor, East Wing, without much trouble. The corridor was quieter. The ceiling was lower. The door at the end was dark wood with no nameplate, just the same key and sword seal from the letter, this time in brass. Harry knocked. "Enter." The voice from inside was not what he'd expected. He'd expected something gruff, curt. Instead it was measured, each word placed with the deliberate precision of someone who had decided a long time ago that precision was worth the effort. Ragnarok was older than the goblins at the door. His face had more lines, more depth, and his eyes were very dark and very still. He was seated behind a desk that was covered in parchment and instruments and several things that seemed to be arguing with each other at low volume. He looked at Harry the way a jeweler looks at a stone that's been brought in for appraisal, not unkindly, but without sentiment. "Harry Potter," he said. "Sit." Harry sat. "You came alone?" "Yes." "You're 7. "Yes." Ragnarok looked at him for a moment that stretched just long enough to become interesting. "Your guardian was sent a copy of this letter." "He kept it," Harry said. "I took it back." Something shifted in Ragnarok's expression, too small and too fast to be called approval, but in the same neighborhood. He set down the quill he'd been holding and folded his hands on the desk. "You understand why you're here? The letter said there's an inheritance claim and my estate is under review. And there's a secondary trustee who takes over if I don't show up." Harry paused. "I'd rather they didn't." "Sound reasoning." Ragnarok reached for a folder to his left, black leather, sealed with 3 separate clasps, and opened it in a single practiced motion. "Your parents established your account in the usual way at your birth. Vault 687 contains their primary liquid assets. The subsidiary vaults contain property deeds, family artifacts, and 2 sealed correspondence collections, one from your father, one from your mother, both marked to be opened on your 17th birthday or upon verified request by the account holder in extenuating circumstances." He paused. "This situation qualifies as extenuating circumstances. What's the inheritance claim?" Harry asked. "Filed by one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, in the capacity of your magical guardian, 6 days after your parents' deaths. The claim grants him administrative access to make certain decisions regarding your estate until your 17th birthday." The cold thing from the bottom of Harry's stomach came back. "He can spend my parents' money?" "He cannot spend it. He can direct certain investments, authorize certain property decisions, and, most relevantly to why you are here today, make certain decisions regarding your medical and magical welfare that would normally require the account holder's consent." Harry didn't say anything to that. "The reason we are reviewing the estate," Ragnarok continued, "is that this office flagged an irregularity 3 months ago during a routine audit of our security protocols. Specifically, we detected a magical signature on your account file indicating that a vault inheritance charm, a standard protective measure your parents placed on their estate at your birth, had been interfered with. Someone attempted to suppress its activation." He looked at Harry steadily. "The charm was meant to alert this bank when the account's primary beneficiary showed signs of magical interference. It took us longer than it should have to trigger because it was muffled. Deliberately." The room was very quiet. One of the instruments on Ragnarok's desk let out a soft, low tone, like a bell struck underwater, and went still again. "You're saying someone put a spell on me," Harry said. "I'm saying that is what the audit suggests. I'm saying we don't make accusations without verification." Ragnarok set the folder aside. "Which is why the next part of this meeting involves a heritage assessment, a full magical scan. It will tell us the truth of what's in your account file, and it will tell us the truth of what's been done to you, if anything has." He paused. "It will not be comfortable. It is not dangerous. And if you decide you don't want to do it, you can leave, and we will pursue the audit without your participation." Harry thought about the letter, about the cold thing in his stomach, about his parents' money and the man with a very long name who had decided he was in charge of it. "Do the scan," he said. They took him to a lower level, down 2 flights of stairs and through a corridor that smelled of stone and old magic, the kind of smell that doesn't have a name but that you recognize at the base of your spine. The room was circular, with walls the color of old bronze, and in the center was a chair that looked like it had been cut from a single piece of pale stone. 2 goblins Harry hadn't met before were waiting, both older, both with the same quality of focused precision that Ragnarok had, like people who treated their work as something worth getting right. One of them was carrying a glass instrument about the size of a small lamp, its interior filled with something that moved like smoke but was the deep, shifting color of a thunderstorm. "Sit in the chair," the one with the instrument said. Her name, Harry would learn later, was Griphook's superior, Barcella. She was older than Ragnak and moved like someone whose joints had decided to become a mild inconvenience she had no interest in accommodating. Hold your hands palm up on the armrests. Don't move once we begin. If something feels strange, say so. If something feels painful, say so. If you feel like you're going to be sick, definitely say so. Has anyone ever been sick? Harry asked. Once. It was memorable. She didn't elaborate. Harry sat. He placed his hands as instructed. The stone was cool and slightly smooth, like river rock. The other goblin, who hadn't spoken, placed his hand on the back of the chair, and Barcella held the glass instrument directly above Harry's head. The smoke inside it, if it was smoke, began to move differently, pulling toward Harry's skull like it was being magnetized. Close your eyes, she said. And breathe. Harry closed his eyes. What happened next was very hard to describe afterward, even when he tried, even years later. There was no pain, exactly. There was pressure, a sensation as if something that had been sitting in a specific, settled position for a very long time was being asked to move, and was resistant, and was being asked again. It started at the base of his skull and moved forward, and it felt like turning pages in a book that was waterlogged. The pages stuck together, and each time one separated there was that particular tension of something that might tear and then the release when it didn't. He heard a tone. Then another, slightly lower. Then a third. Then the tones became a kind of sequence, a cascade, and each one he heard was accompanied by a sensation like a small knot loosening somewhere behind his eyes, and the accumulated loosening became something larger, and the something larger became a smell. His mother's perfume, or what must have been his mother's perfume, because he'd never smelled it before, and yet every single cell in his body recognized it with the specific, bone-deep certainty of something that was true before language. His hands gripped the armrests. Say so if you need us to stop, Barcella said. Her voice was very calm, which was steadying. Harry did not say so. The pages kept turning. He heard his father's laugh, not a memory, not an image, just the pure sound of it, warm and a little too loud, the laugh of someone who had never once decided to make themselves smaller. It lasted 2 seconds and then it was gone, and Harry's chest did something complicated in its wake. More pages. More loosened knots. Something that had been a wall became a door, became an open threshold, and through it came not images but knowledge, the specific, embedded, cellular kind that isn't learned but remembered. He knew his mother had a particular way of arguing a point that started soft and got steadily more precise until the other person realized they'd been outmaneuvered 3 exchanges ago. He knew his father whistled when he was nervous. He knew they had argued, loudly, over whether to trust a plan that someone else had made for their family. He knew his mother had been right. The cascade stopped. The room was very quiet. Harry opened his eyes. Barcella and the other goblin were both looking at the glass instrument, and neither of them was moving, and the expression on Barcella's face, she was a goblin, her face did not do what human faces do, but there was something in the set of it, was the closest he'd seen to anything that could be called shaken. The smoke in the glass had changed. It was no longer deep gray-blue. It was deep red and black, and it was very still, and in the upper half of the glass, glowing in the same material as the smoke, were numbers. 47, Ragnak spoke from the doorway. Harry hadn't heard him come in. His voice was flat and controlled and carried precisely the amount of emotion that someone uses when they have decided that allowing more than that amount would compromise their ability to function. 47, he said. Memory charms. Placed over a period of approximately 5 years, Barcella said, not taking her eyes off the instrument. Beginning when he was approximately 22 months old. She paused. Some are simple suppressions, emotional memory, sensory memory. The earliest ones appear designed to prevent the formation of strong attachment to the subjects. She stopped. A beat. To the memory of his parents. And the later ones? Ragnak asked. More specific. More targeted. She set the instrument down on a stand beside the chair with the particular carefulness of someone handling something that has become more important than it was when they picked it up. Several of them are suppressing what I can only describe as instructional content. Memories of being spoken to. Of being told things. She looked at Harry. Your parents left you messages. Encoded in your magical core at birth, it's a very old piece of magic, not commonly used anymore because it requires an exceptional level of magical ability in the parents. It's called a resonance echo. The idea is that if something happens to the parents before the child is old enough to receive their wisdom, the magic preserves it. A pause. All 7 of the echo segments were charmed over. Thoroughly. The room was quiet for a long moment. Someone didn't want you to know what your parents wanted to tell you, the second goblin said. It was the first time he'd spoken. His voice was younger than his face. Harry was quiet. He was looking at the number in the glass. 47. He was thinking about the word systematically, because that was the word that kept arriving, and it was a word that meant this had not been an accident or a moment of fear or a single bad decision. 47 meant someone had come back, again and again, over 5 years, to a child in a cupboard, and made sure that child could not remember who loved him. Can they be reversed? He asked. Some have already begun to reverse through the scan process, Barcella said. The instrument disturbs them as it maps them, unavoidable side effect. The rest will need to be removed deliberately. We can do it. It will take, she looked at the second goblin, who held up 3 fingers, 3 sessions. 1 today if you consent. Do today, Harry said. It will be tiring. Possibly disorienting. You will feel, do today, Harry said again, not rudely, just with the finality of someone who has already done the calculation and is done being taught to like the calculation might change. Barcella looked at him. Then she looked at Ragnarok. Then she picked up the instrument again. Close your eyes, she said. And breathe. The first session removed 19 charms. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Harry did not cry during it, not exactly, but his face did things he wasn't fully in control of, and at one point, when a cluster of 5 charms unraveled in quick succession and he heard his mother's voice, not a sensation this time but an actual voice, actual words, Harry, sweetheart, listen to me, his hands shook so hard the stone armrests were the only thing keeping them still. He came out of the chair on slightly unsteady legs and accepted the cup of something hot and dark and bitter that the second goblin pressed into his hands without comment. He drank it. It tasted like the magical equivalent of a slap, not pleasant, but grounding. Ragnarok was waiting in the corridor outside. He walked Harry to a smaller room with chairs that were considerably more comfortable than the stone one, and a fire in the grate that was burning something that smelled like cedar and old paper and something else Harry couldn't name but found unexpectedly calming. They sat across from each other for a moment. The secondary trustee, Harry said. The one who takes over my estate if I don't comply. It's Dumbledore. Yes. He's the magical guardian. Yes. And he's the one who put the charms on me. Ragnarok was quiet for exactly the right length of time, long enough to mean he wasn't going to pretend the question didn't have an obvious answer. We do not yet have verified proof of the caster's identity. The charms are of a very high order. They are consistent with the magical signature on record for Dumbledore in our files. But the formal statement of that conclusion requires 3 cross-referenced verifications under Goblin law, and we have completed 1. How long will it take to complete the other 2? 48 hours for the second. 72 for the third. Harry nodded. He drank more of the bitter thing. He thought about his mother's voice, Harry, sweetheart, listen to me, and felt the grief of it like a room he'd just been told existed and been handed the key to, a room that had always been there, locked from the outside. What happens when you have all 3? He asked. Then we have a verified record. Which can be filed with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Which can be used in a Wiesengemot proceeding. Which can, in theory, result in the removal of Dumbledore's status as your magical guardian, the termination of his administrative access to the Potter estate, and a full legal inquiry into his conduct. Ragnock paused. In theory. You don't think it'll happen? I think the Wizengamot is composed largely of people who owe Albus Dumbledore a very great deal, and who are disinclined to believe he is capable of anything requiring a criminal inquiry. He is the chief warlock. He is the supreme mugwump. He is the man who is credited with ending Grindelwald's war. The fire crackled. He is, in many people's minds, not a man so much as a symbol. And symbols are very difficult to prosecute. But you're going to try, Harry said. Gringotts does not pursue justice, Ragnock said, with the particular dryness of someone correcting a common misunderstanding they've grown tired of. We pursue accounts. What was taken from you, what was done to you, represents a tampering with Gringotts' client records, a breach of our protective charms, and an attempt to redirect a significant magical estate through illegal means. The fact that justice and our interests align in this case is coincidence. We will pursue our interests thoroughly. Harry almost smiled at that. It felt like the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him. What do I do? Ragnock reached into his jacket and produced a document, several pages of dense text, bound in black. You have legal options. The first is a petition of emancipated majority, which can be filed by a minor who has demonstrated magical capacity and material self-sufficiency. Given your inheritance, the material self-sufficiency is not the obstacle. The magical capacity will be evaluated on the second visit. He set the document on the table between them. The second option is a formal complaint of magical misconduct, which can be filed with the DMLE directly. I would recommend a specific name, Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE. She is known to us. She is, in our experience, the rare sort of official who reads what she is given. Will she help me? She will investigate. Whether that becomes help depends entirely on what she finds. A pause. And on how she feels about what's been done to a 7-year-old boy. Harry looked at the document. Then at the fire. Then back at Ragnock. Can I take some of my money today? He asked. Ragnock raised an eyebrow, which on a goblin was a remarkably expressive motion. That depends on what you want it for. I need somewhere to stay tonight. And I need to eat something. A beet. I also want a new pair of glasses. Mine are held together with tape. There was a long pause, and then Ragnock made a sound that Harry would spend a long time afterward trying to categorize. It was too short to be a laugh and too deliberate to be anything involuntary. It was something more like the sound of a person who has lived a very long time and seldom finds anything new, encountering something new. He reached for a form. Your account is under review, but as primary beneficiary, you retain the right to withdraw emergency liquid assets of up to 200 galleons per calendar month pending resolution. He began writing. I will arrange a room at the Leaky Cauldron. I will also arrange for someone from our legal team to accompany you for the next 2 sessions, as your account manager. Her name is Fiara. She is sharp and not easily impressed, which you will find useful. He signed the form and passed it to Harry. The vault is on level 3. A cart will take you. Harry picked up the form and folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. Thank you, he said. It came out more genuine than polished, which was the only way he knew how to say things and the only way, he'd later come to understand, that Ragnock respected. The goblin looked at him, one of those long, measuring looks that were becoming familiar. Do not let anyone know you have been here, he said. Not until we have the second verification. If Dumbledore is alerted before we have a documented record, he may take steps that complicate matters significantly. Right, Harry said. I'm good at not being noticed. He said it without bitterness, which was the remarkable thing. Just a plain fact about himself, something he'd filed away like knowing which floorboards creaked, because that kind of knowledge was useful and self-pity was not. He stood. He was slightly shorter than the chair he'd been sitting in. His glasses were, as noted, held together with tape. He walked out of Gringotts with 200 galleons, a room booked for the week, and 19 fewer holes in his memory. He ate at a small place in Diagon Alley that he found by the smell, something warm and savory drifting out under the gap of a wooden door. He ordered the first thing on the menu without reading what it was, because he was hungry enough that the specifics seemed less important than the speed. It turned out to be a stew with something in it that moved when he first opened the bowl, which alarmed him, and then stopped moving, which was more alarming, and then tasted like the best thing he'd ever eaten, which resolved the issue entirely. He sat by the window and watched Diagon Alley happen outside. People in robes arguing about Quidditch results. An elderly witch arguing with a hat stand, which was apparently arguing back. Two children running ahead of their parents, pointing at things with the wild, unfiltered enthusiasm of people encountering wonder fresh. Harry watched all of it and thought about the voice. "Harry, sweetheart, listen to me." He hadn't heard the rest. Not yet. 19 charms removed and he had her perfume, his father's laugh, a sense of who they'd been that was still assembling itself in the space behind his sternum, but not the rest of what she'd been trying to tell him. The echo segments were still locked behind the remaining 28 charms. He thought about that. He thought about what it meant that someone had locked them. That someone had stood over a 22-month-old child and decided that what his mother wanted to say to him was too dangerous to be heard. He didn't feel rage about it, not yet, not cleanly. What he felt was something quieter and more precise. A determination with a very sharp edge. The feeling of someone who has been given an extraordinarily clear answer to the question of what they are doing next. He paid for the stew. He left a tip because the woman who'd brought it to him had refilled his water without being asked, which seemed worth acknowledging. He went to the leaky cauldron and found the room Ragnarok had booked, small, clean, nothing like what he'd imagined a proper room might be, but with a real bed and a pillow that wasn't half flat and a window that looked out onto a courtyard where the cat from the bar below was pretending to ignore a pigeon. He lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and let the day settle. 47 memory charms. His parents had tried to talk to him. Had encoded their voices into his magic before they died, knowing they might die, knowing he would need them. And someone had come to him, repeatedly, systematically, over 5 years of his life, and made sure he couldn't hear them. He thought about Dumbledore. He knew the name, vaguely, the way you know a name you've heard mentioned only in contexts you don't fully understand. Petunia said it once in a voice she used for things she found troubling. He was, apparently, very important. Very trusted. Very powerful. Harry thought about all of that. Then he thought about his mother's voice, and how it had been trying to reach him for 5 years from behind a wall that someone else had built, and how it had taken a goblin audit and a scared 7-year-old stealing his own mail to get this far. He was not afraid of Dumbledore. He was certain of this the way he was certain of certain other deep, structural things about himself, the way he could find north without a compass, the way he always knew when something was wrong before he could articulate why. He was not afraid. He was something else. Something that didn't have a clean name yet, but that was extremely focused, and patient, and not going away. He closed his eyes. In the dark behind them, he practiced the thing that had been given back to him, the knowledge that he had been loved. That his parents had loved him in a specific, particular, irreplaceable way. That they had thought ahead to his life, had tried to protect him, had left him something even at the end. He'd been living in a house where he was tolerated at best and resented at worst, and he had never, he understood this now in the hollow, final way you understand a thing that's been true forever, he had never once believed he was simply, plainly, for no reason other than being himself, loved. He believed it now. It was like being handed back a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing because the missing was all he'd ever known. He slept for 10 hours without dreaming, which was unusual, and woke up in the morning feeling, for the first time in conscious memory, like a person who was going somewhere. The second and third sessions were scheduled for Thursday and Saturday. On Wednesday he bought new glasses, small, wire-rimmed, nothing dramatic, from a shop in Diagon Alley where the optician was a squinting witch who made him read letters off a chart that kept changing language mid-row and told him his prescription was remarkable for someone without formal training, which he stored as data without being sure what to do with it. He also bought clothes that fit. This was stranger than the glasses, and more affecting than he'd expected, the straightforward reality of pulling on a shirt that was his size, that had been chosen for him specifically, that was not a hand-me-down from a cousin the size of a small whale. He stood in front of the mirror in the shop and looked at himself for a while. He looked like a different person. Which was partly the clothes and partly the glasses and partly something else, something in the set of his shoulders and the steadiness of his eyes, something the previous 48 hours had put there and that he was not interested in undoing. On Thursday, the second session removed 17 more charms. This one was harder. The 17th charm, the last one removed that day, unraveled to reveal a memory of his mother's face. Not the voice yet, not the instructional echo, but a memory of being held. He was very small, and she was looking at him, and what her face was doing in that moment was something that took him a long time to find a name for, because he'd never had a reference point before. She looked proud of him. Not for anything. Not for an accomplishment or a behavior or a correct answer. Just proud of him for existing, for being there, for being hers. He pressed his lips together for a moment and breathed through his nose. Barcella waited without saying anything, which was one of the things he'd come to appreciate about her. She treated his reactions as his own business, which was the most respectful thing anyone had done for him recently and possibly ever. By Saturday, 11 more charms removed, the resonance echo opened. All 7 segments. Harry sat in the stone chair with his eyes closed and listened to his parents for the first time. His mother spoke for 22 minutes. His father for 16. They spoke to him with the full weight of people who knew they might not be there, who had poured everything they needed him to know into the last piece of magic they would ever cast. They spoke to him about love and about danger, about the wizarding world's politics and its blind spots, about the man they had trusted and then stopped trusting, and about why, and about what they wanted Harry to know in a world where that man was powerful and Harry was not. They told him about the night of October 31st, 1981. They told him it was not a surprise. They told him that Dumbledore had known, not that Voldemort would come that night, but that Harry was prophesied to be either weapon or casualty, and that he had made certain arrangements to ensure Harry survived in a way that kept Harry dependent. Manageable. A boy who could be pointed at the right moment at the right problem and would be grateful enough for any kindness that he wouldn't ask hard questions. His father's voice, warm and a little ragged around the edges with something that was trying to be steady, said, "You're going to be extraordinary, Harry. Not because of the prophecy, not because of what Voldemort did to you. Just because you are. Don't let anyone tell you that your power belongs to them. It doesn't. It belongs to you. Every single piece of it." His mother's voice, precise and fierce and full, "I need you to know that we chose to fight for you. We didn't martyr ourselves. We fought, and we were not enough, and I am angry about that even now, and I need you to be angry too, not swallowed by it, but fueled by it. Find the people worth trusting. Trust them completely. Do not trust the people who need you small. You hear me, sweetheart? Do not let anyone need you small." When it ended, the room was very quiet. Harry sat in the stone chair for a long time without moving. Then he opened his eyes, and they were very bright and very clear, and he looked at Barcella, who was watching him with the expression she always had, controlled, precise, waiting, and he said, "I want to meet with Ragnarok. Today. I want to file the formal complaint." "He's available this afternoon," she said, as if she'd been expecting exactly this. "And I want a list," Harry said, "of every decision Dumbledore has made with my estate in the last 5 years. Every single one." Barcella pulled a folder from the stand beside the chair. It was already prepared. She handed it to him. He opened it. He started reading. By the time he reached the 3rd page, the thing he felt was no longer quiet or formless. It had shape and weight and direction. His mother had told him to be fueled by it, and he was, and the fuel was burning clean and hot and without waste, and it was not going to run out. He was 7 years old. His parents had been stolen from him twice, once on the night they died, and once by the slow, careful erasure of everything they'd ever tried to give him. He was getting it back. All of it. Chapter 2, What James Knew. The folder was 43 pages long. Harry read all of it sitting in Ragnar's office, while the afternoon light moved across the floor in a slow diagonal and the instruments on the desk made their soft, periodic sounds. Ragnar worked at his desk without comment, which Harry appreciated. He didn't explain things Harry hadn't asked to have explained. He didn't watch Harry's face for reactions. He simply worked, and let Harry read, and when Harry reached the end of the last page and set the folder down, Ragnar looked up. Questions? Several, Harry said. Starting with this. He turned back to page 11 and set it on the edge of the desk so Ragnar could see. It was a transaction record, a quarterly disbursement authorization, dated February 1983, signed in the looping confident hand that Harry had already started to recognize as Dumbledore's. The disbursement was for 300 galleons, transferred from Vault 687 to an account labeled Muggle Welfare Provision, Surrey. That one was filed as a maintenance contribution toward your housing with the Desley family, Ragnar said. He was paying them, Harry said. Quarterly. For approximately 4 years, until the payments were quietly discontinued. Ragnar's voice was perfectly neutral. The last one was 18 months ago. Harry looked at the number again. 300 galleons, 4 times a year, for 4 years. His parents' money, used to pay for the privilege of living in a cupboard. He set the page down. He didn't say anything about it, because the thing he felt about it was not the sort of thing that was useful to say out loud. He noted it, filed it in the part of himself that was building a very thorough and organized case, and moved on. Page 26, he said. The property decision. Ragnar had clearly already memorized the folder. Godric's Hollow. The primary Potter residence. Dumbledore authorized its classification as a heritage monument under a preservation charter, which prevents it from being sold, transferred, renovated, or demolished without ministry consent. It also prevents the account holder from accessing it without filing a formal application. A pause. The application process requires approval from the Chief Warlock. Who is Dumbledore? Yes. Harry thought about this. So he locked me out of my own house. And ensured that even when you came of age, accessing it would require his permission. Ragnar folded his hands. Or did require. The filing of a formal complaint of magical misconduct creates a legal hold on all secondary authority actions taken by the named party. Once the complaint is registered, Dumbledore's administrative decisions regarding your estate are frozen, pending review. How long does the review take? That depends entirely on who conducts it. Which is why I recommended Amelia Bones. He reached into a drawer and produced a second, smaller folder, this one green, sealed with a single clasp. I have prepared a briefing document for her office. It contains the verified results of your heritage assessment, the transaction records, the property decisions, and a formal statement from Gringotts attesting to the nature and estimated timeline of the memory charms placed on your person. He set it on the desk. It does not contain the content of your parents' resonance echo. That is your private property, and we do not include it without your explicit consent. Keep it out, Harry said immediately. As you wish. Harry looked at the green folder. Will she act on it? She will open an investigation. The investigation will determine whether she acts. Ragnar leaned back slightly in his chair, which was as close to a relaxed posture as he seemed to come. Bones is a woman who follows evidence. She is also a woman with a significant sense of personal justice, which she would likely describe as professionalism but which functions the same way. When she reads this document, he touched the green folder briefly, she will find it very difficult to ignore. When can we file? Today, if you sign. Let's sign. The filing took 20 minutes. The documents were dense with legal language that Harry couldn't fully parse, but Ragnarok read aloud each section before Harry signed it, patiently, without condescension, which was the clearest signal yet that he took Harry seriously as a principal rather than as a child who needed to be managed through the process. When the last signature was in place, Ragnarok sealed the documents with a stamp that left a mark in the same key-and-sword burgundy as Harry's original letter, and handed copies to Harry in a flat leather case with a strap he could wear over his shoulder. "Don't lose these," Ragnarok said. "They are your originals. We keep duplicates in our archive, but if anyone were to challenge the filing, your copies serve as independent verification." Harry put the strap over his shoulder. "What happens now?" "Now you complete your sessions, which you have done. The remaining 11 charms are resolved. The Gringotts verification is complete." Ragnarok stood, a rare thing, and it made the moment feel marked, intentional. "We will deliver the complaint to Bones' office by courier tonight. Her office opens Monday. She will have read it by Tuesday morning, if I know anything about her habits." He looked at Harry across the desk. "In the meantime, you are staying at the Leaky Cauldron. Until I figure out the next part, yes. You cannot return to the Dursley household," Ragnarok said, and his tone had shifted, still precise, but with an edge that was something other than professional. "Not because it is legally impossible, but because we would strongly advise against it. Your guardian's access to your estate is frozen, but his access to you as your magical guardian is not yet legally terminated. If you return to his sphere of influence while this investigation is live, he can place additional charms. He can refile. He can complicate things significantly." "I wasn't planning to go back," Harry said. "Good." Ragnarok moved to the door and opened it, which Harry was coming to understand was his way of signaling an end to a meeting without anything so blunt as telling someone to leave. At the door, he paused. "Fiara will be your account manager going forward. She will be your point of contact for any legal questions, any estate matters, and any issues that arise. She is also available to accompany you to any ministry meeting or legal proceeding." He looked at Harry with those very still, very dark eyes. "You are 7 years old and you have filed a formal misconduct complaint against Albus Dumbledore. This is not a small thing. Be careful where you go and who you speak to about it." "I understand," Harry said. "I believe you do," Ragnarok said, and that was the closest thing to a compliment Harry had ever received that felt entirely without strings. He went back to his room and sat on the bed with the leather case in his lap and thought for a long time. His parents' voices were still in him, not literally, not like he could summon them on demand, but the way a piece of music is in you after you've heard it properly for the first time. The shape and weight of what they'd said. He kept returning to specific things, turning them over, examining them the way you examine something you've been handed that is both a gift and a map. His mother had been angry. That was the first thing. Not in the small, managed way people performed anger to seem passionate, but in the clean, structural way of someone who had assessed a situation accurately and found it genuinely unacceptable. She was angry about the prophecy, angry about Dumbledore's management of it, angry about the isolation they'd been put into under the Fidelius charm, which she had opposed on grounds she'd laid out with such precision that Harry, hearing them at 7, had understood every single one. She had said, "He told us it was the only way. He told us the secret would be safe. He told us to trust him and we did, and the secret was not safe, and he came up with reasons. He always has reasons. The reasons are always very good. That is the thing about Dumbledore, he is never without a reason, and the reasons are never wrong on their own terms, and you have to look very hard at the frame around the reason to see what's actually happening." Harry thought about that. About frames. About how a very good reason in a very wrong frame was still a wrong reason, just dressed better. His father had been different. Not softer, there was nothing soft about what James Potter had said, but warmer in his delivery, more inclined toward specifics, toward anecdotes. He had told Harry about Dumbledore the way you tell someone about a person you once admired and then learned to distrust, with the specific grief of someone who knows the admiration wasn't foolish, just eventually incomplete. He had said, "I trusted him because he was trustworthy, up to a point." The point was this: he trusted his own judgment above all else. Including yours. Including everyone's. He made decisions for people because he believed he was better positioned to make them. And maybe sometimes he was. But he made the decision to put you with the Dursleys, Harry. I want you to know that I fought that decision. I want you to know that your mother fought it harder. We were not consulted. We were told after. A pause in the recording, a silence that had its own weight. I asked him why. He said the blood protection would keep you safe. I asked him from what, exactly. Voldemort was gone. He said, from what comes after. And when I pushed him on what he meant by that, he said, the world is not done with Harry yet, James. And he said it like it was a comfort. Harry had sat with that for a while, with the phrase the world is not done with Harry yet and what it meant about how Dumbledore thought about him. Not as a child. Not even as a person, quite. As a function. A piece in a sequence that Dumbledore had planned and believed in and was managing with the best intentions and without asking anyone. He pulled out a sheet of paper from the desk in the room, plain, Muggle paper, which felt right, somehow, private and his own, and he wrote down what he knew. 1. Dumbledore placed 47 memory charms on him starting at 22 months old. The purpose was to prevent him forming strong memories of his parents, and to block the resonance echo his parents had left for him. Someone with 47 carefully placed charms isn't acting impulsively. They're maintaining a system. 2. The charms were consistent with Dumbledore's magical signature on file at Gringotts. Not confirmed yet, 2 more verifications to go, but consistent. 3. Dumbledore was using Harry's estate money to pay the Dursleys and to execute property decisions that locked Harry out of his own inheritance. 4. His parents had not trusted Dumbledore, and they had tried to tell him this. The charms had prevented them from doing so. 5. Amelia Bones now had a formal complaint. The investigation was live. He read it over. Then he wrote, at the bottom, a 6th point, in smaller letters, not because it was less important but because it was harder. 6. They loved me and they tried. He folded the paper and put it in the inside pocket of his new jacket, where it would be close without being visible. He went downstairs to the bar, ate dinner without incident, and went to bed at 9 o'clock, because the day had been enormous and his body knew it even when his mind was still running. He spent Sunday in the alley. Not in the purposeful, getting things done way of the previous days, this was something different, more like reconnaissance mixed with recovery. He was discovering, slowly, that the world he'd been born into was not what he'd expected it to be. He hadn't expected anything, technically, because he'd spent 7 years being told as directly as possible through behavior if not through words that he was a burden and an oddity. But the wizarding world was a different kind of surprise. It was full and loud and strange and it had a texture to it, a density of history and magic and story that pressed against him from all sides and demanded to be taken seriously. He found a bookshop. It was wedged between a cauldron retailer and an apothecary that smelled intensely of something Harry could only describe as alive, and its sign read flourish and blots in gold letters that shimmered slightly when a cloud moved over the sun. Harry went in mostly on instinct, and came out 2 hours later with a bag of books that accounted for a not insignificant portion of his monthly withdrawal but that he did not regret at all. He bought the standard histories, A History of Magic, The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, Notable Wizarding Events of the 20th Century, but also a few things outside the standard curriculum, a volume on goblin banking law, which seemed immediately practical, a book on magical inheritance and blood protections, and one slim, old book tucked in the back of a shelf that was titled Resonance Magic, The Old Craft of Echo and Voice, which was technically out of print and had a price tag that looked like it had been there since before Harry was born. He bought that last one first. Back in his room at the Leaky Cauldron, he opened it before the others, and he read it with the focused intensity of someone who is not simply learning but recognizing. A resonance echo, the book explained, was one of the oldest forms of deliberate magical legacy casting. It dated to pre-Hogwarts magical tradition, when parents who lived in dangerous circumstances needed a reliable method of passing on not just material inheritance but cognitive and emotional inheritance, knowledge, warning, love, identity. The echo was embedded in the child's magical core at birth during a specific ritual that required both parents, a high level of raw magical ability, and what the book called a willingness to spend, meaning the caster had to pour something irreplaceable into the magic to make it permanent. Something of themselves. Not blood, but memory. The ritual required the parents to surrender their memory of the child's birth, to give it, permanently and irrevocably, into the echo itself. Harry stopped reading for a moment. They had given up their memory of the moment he was born. Had handed it into him, so that even if they weren't there, some piece of that moment would be. He looked at the wall for a while. Then he turned the page. The suppression of a resonance echo, the book said in the dry tone of something recording a historical fact it disapproved of, was considered one of the most severe violations of legacy magic in pre-unified wizarding law. The echo was an act of parental will, cast in love and self-sacrifice, and to block it was to interfere not just with the child's memory but with the parent's final gift. Several historical cases were referenced, all of them ancient, all of them treated with the gravity of something between theft and desecration. Harry read all of the historical cases. Then he put the book down and picked up the volume on magical inheritance. He read until midnight, stopped not because he was done but because his eyes started missing words, which he recognized as his body's non-negotiable position on the question of rest. He turned out the light, lay in the dark, and listened to the quiet sounds of the leaky cauldron settling around him, the faint noise of the bar downstairs winding down, a cat outside on the eaves, the occasional distant sound of the magical street doing whatever it did at night. He thought about everything his parents had been trying to tell him, and about the man who had decided he shouldn't hear it, and about Amelia Bones reading a file in her office on Tuesday morning. He thought about Sirius Black. His father had mentioned him, not in the echo, but in the memories that had been returned with the earlier charms, a peripheral figure in several of them. His father's laugh in the context of a much louder, more chaotic laugh, a dark-haired man throwing James a look across a room that was full of argument and firelight and the particular energy of people who trusted each other absolutely. His mother's voice once, saying Sirius would never, with the full conviction of someone who had considered the question and closed it. And yet Sirius Black was in Azkaban. Had been there for 6 years, since the night of October 31st, 1981. Had been sent there for the murder of 13 Muggles and his supposed betrayal of the Potters to Voldemort. Harry had turned this over several times and kept arriving at the same place. His mother had said Sirius would never. His father's memories held nothing that looked like distrust, nothing that looked like fear, nothing that looked like the dynamic of a friend who was also a spy. And Dumbledore had arranged the Fidelius charm, and Dumbledore had made the call about the secret keeper, and Dumbledore was, at this point, someone Harry trusted exactly as much as the number 47 suggested he should. Which was to say, not at all. He made a note on a new piece of paper, in the dark, by touch, find out what actually happened to Sirius Black. Monday was quiet by recent standards, which meant it only contained 2 significant things. The first was a letter from Fiara, delivered by a small, extremely serious-looking owl that arrived at his window at 7 in the morning and waited with the patience of something that had been told patience was non-negotiable. The letter informed him that his account was fully unfrozen for emergency withdrawals, that the formal complaint had been delivered to the DMLE on Saturday evening, and that if he intended to remain in the alley for the short term, Gringotts could arrange a longer-term room on a formal lease from the Leaky Cauldron's proprietor, which would be a significantly better situation than a weekly rate. Harry wrote back yes to the lease immediately and gave the owl a corner of toast, which it accepted with the air of something doing you a favor. The second significant thing was more complicated. He was sitting in a corner of the Leaky Cauldron in the late morning, well into the Goblin banking law book, when the door opened and a group of people came in that made everyone in the bar look up, not dramatically, not with fanfare, just with the particular ambient awareness of people who register importance before they consciously process it. The man at the center of the group was tall, white-haired, with a long beard and half-moon spectacles and robes of deep purple that should have looked theatrical and instead looked, somehow, simply correct. His face was warm and slightly tired and carved with a lifetime of careful, attentive smiling. He moved through the bar with the ease of someone who had never, in his adult life, walked into a room and doubted his right to be the center of it. Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him from nothing. He had no prior image of the man, no memory of ever being in his presence, and yet he knew who it was immediately, the way you sometimes know things you have no business knowing, the way you recognize a threat before your mind has assembled the specific evidence. He did not duck his head. He did not hunch or shrink or become suddenly very interested in his book in the practiced, survival-tested way of someone making themselves small. He looked at Dumbledore across the room with a level, measuring gaze and thought, so that's who you are. Dumbledore was talking to Tom the barman, who was nodding in the deferential way of someone who would nod at anything this particular person said. He didn't appear to be looking for Harry. He appeared to be having a routine stop, the air of a man on his way somewhere with a moment to spare for pleasantries. And then his eyes moved, in that unhurried, all-encompassing sweep that Harry suspected never actually missed anything, and they found Harry in the corner. A pause. Very brief. The kind of person who is very good at controlling their face makes when something unexpected happens and they decide, in the space of half a second, to cover it. Dumbledore's smile shifted slightly, warmer, more focused, aimed at Harry the way a spotlight is aimed at something worth illuminating. He started toward him. Harry closed his book and set it on the table, spine up, not hiding it. His hands were steady on the tabletop, and his face was composed and neutral and giving away exactly nothing, which at 7 years old was an extraordinary thing to be capable of and which was, in its own way, an answer to who Harry was becoming. "My goodness," Dumbledore said, in a voice that was genuinely warm and practiced in equal measure. "Harry Potter." "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. Something moved through Dumbledore's eyes, quick, almost too quick, at the fact that Harry knew who he was. "You know me. I'm pleased, though I confess I'm surprised to find you here. Does your aunt know you're in London, my boy?" "My boy." Harry noted the phrase and what it was doing, the gentle claim of it, the soft establishment of hierarchy disguised as affection. "I had some business to take care of," he said. "Business?" Dumbledore's tone was light, curious, faintly amused, the tone of an adult who finds a child's self-possession charming in the way that doesn't take it seriously. He pulled out the chair across from Harry without asking and sat down. He had the easy authority of someone who was so accustomed to people welcoming him that the mechanics of welcome had become invisible to him. "That sounds very serious for such a young man." "It was serious," Harry said. "It's handled now." Dumbledore studied him. Harry studied him back. It was, if Harry was aware of this or not, an unusual dynamic for the old wizard, someone who met his attention with matching stillness rather than the usual deference or nervousness that most people produced in response to his particular quality of presence. "You look well," Dumbledore said, and Harry recognized this as a probe, gentle and practiced, seeking information about his condition, his state, whether anything was different. "I feel well," Harry said, which was true, and said nothing. "Your aunt and uncle must be wondering where you are." "I don't think they are," Harry said pleasantly. "But thank you for the concern." Another tiny pause. Dumbledore's smile was still in place, still warm, still aimed at Harry with what appeared to be genuine affection and probably, Harry thought, was, the genuine affection of someone who had convinced themselves that the harm they did was the cost of something worth doing. "Is there anything you need, Harry? Anything I can help with?" The question was offered with such open warmth, such seamless generosity, that Harry spent a moment genuinely appreciating the craftsmanship of it. A 7-year-old boy, alone in a pub in a strange street, and the first question from the most powerful wizard in Britain was, "Is there anything I can help with?" It was almost perfect. Almost. "I think I have everything sorted," Harry said. "But it was good to meet you." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, a moment that felt carefully calibrated, warm but assessing, like a jeweler who has been handed a stone and is deciding whether it's what they think it is. Then he stood, and his smile settled into something that was still warm but now carried the very faintest trace of something more careful, more considered, that Harry thought was probably the first honest thing the man had shown him. "I'm sure we'll see each other again soon," Dumbledore said. "Take care of yourself." "I will," Harry said. He watched Dumbledore leave. He watched the door close. He picked up his book again, found his page, and kept reading. Across the bar, Tom the barman had been watching the exchange with the expression of a man witnessing something he couldn't categorize, which was clearly uncomfortable for him. Harry paid no attention to this. He had just told Albus Dumbledore, in the clearest possible terms while saying nothing that could be acted on, that he was not impressed. That he was not manageable. That the performance of warmth and authority, which worked on virtually everyone, had encountered something it didn't have an answer for yet. He felt his mother somewhere in the back of his chest, fierce and clear. "Good," she seemed to say. Tuesday came. Harry was eating breakfast when Tom brought him a second owl, this one official-looking, with ministry seals on the envelope and a leg band that identified it as a DMLE courier bird. He opened it at the table with the quiet focus of someone who had been expecting this but not precisely when. The letter was short, written in a neat, slightly compressed hand that suggested a person who was thorough and economical with their words. "Mr. Potter, this office has received documentation regarding your case filed by Gringotts Bank, London. The documentation has been reviewed and the matter has been elevated to priority status. I would like to speak with you personally at your earliest convenience. A time has been set for Thursday at 2 p.m. at the Ministry of Magic, DMLE offices, Level 2. A Gringotts representative may accompany you if you wish. I will be frank, what I have read is serious. You deserve to hear that from someone in this office who can do something about it. Amelia Bones, Head, Department of Magical Law Enforcement." Harry read it twice. Then he wrote a reply, "Thursday at 2 p.m. works. I'll bring my account manager," and sent it back with the owl, who accepted the letter with considerably less fanfare than the Gringotts bird and was gone in under a minute. He sent a second note to Fiara. Then he ate the rest of his breakfast and went back to his books. Wednesday he spent reading, and Tuesday night he spent reading, and most of Monday evening he'd spent reading, and the cumulative effect of this was that by Thursday morning Harry Potter was the most functionally educated 7-year-old in Wizarding Britain on the specific subjects of inheritance law, magical misconduct, memory charm legislation, and the history of what he thought of privately as the machinery of Dumbledore, the specific, interlocking network of positions and relationships and favors and trust that made the man not just powerful but essentially unassailable in ordinary circumstances. He was thinking about extraordinary circumstances. Fiara met him outside the Leaky Cauldron at 1:30. She was younger than Barcella, sharper in the physical way of someone whose joints had no complaints, and she moved with the purposeful efficiency of a person who had never once in her career been 5 minutes late. She had a flat, rectangular briefcase that Harry suspected contained documents that could do significant damage to several careers if opened in the right room. "Ready?" she said, which was not a question exactly. "Yes," Harry said, which was not exactly an answer. They went by flow, which was Harry's first time and which was, he decided, an experience that could only charitably be described as travel. It was more like being disassembled and reassembled at speed while on fire, briefly. He arrived in the ministry atrium with his hair inverted and his jacket straight, which he considered an acceptable outcome. The Ministry of Magic was large in the way that powerful institutions are large, not just physically, but in the specific gravitational sense of a place that knows it matters and has arranged its corridors accordingly. The atrium was all polished floors and golden light and the soft hum of ambient magic, and at its center was a fountain, golden statues, idealized and grand, a witch and wizard and several magical creatures arranged in a composition that Harry looked at for exactly 3 seconds before deciding it said more about whoever commissioned it than about any of the subjects. Fiara kept moving. Harry kept up. Level 2 was quieter than the atrium, with the dense, document-heavy atmosphere of a floor where actual work was done rather than merely represented. Amelia Bones' outer office was staffed by a young witch with ink on her collar and the particular posture of someone trying to look calm while very much not being calm, and she showed them in immediately, which suggested they were expected in the most prepared possible sense of the word. Amelia Bones stood up when they came in. She was solidly built, square-faced, with a monocle on a chain and iron-gray hair cut short without apology. She looked like someone who had spent a significant portion of their life being the person who told other people the truth they didn't want to hear, and who had decided early that this was more important than being liked for it. She looked at Harry the way she probably looked at all her witnesses, with a frank, measuring directness that assumed intelligence and was prepared to adjust that assumption either direction based on evidence. "Harry Potter," she said. Not warmly, not coldly. Like a name that has weight, and she was acknowledging the weight. "Madam Bones," Harry said. She gestured at the chairs across from her desk. They sat. She sat. She did not do the thing of treating him like a child, which Harry had started to use as an immediate sorting criterion, not as an insult to the adults who did it, just as a practical question of who he was going to be able to talk to directly. "I've read the Gringotts file," she said. "All of it. Twice." She folded her hands on the desk, which was covered in organized stacks of documents that had the quality of things she'd been through recently. "I want to understand what you want from this meeting." Harry looked at her steadily. "I want to know what can actually be done. Not what should be done, I've figured out what should be done. What can be done?" Something shifted in Bones' expression, a recalibration, quick and unperformed. "How old are you?" 7. "Right." She looked at Fiara. "The heritage assessment is verified?" 2 of 3 verifications complete, Fiara said. 3rd pending. Estimated completion Sunday. "The 3rd verification confirms Dumbledore's signature on the memory charms?" "Yes." Bones made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite something sharper, something in between, the sound of a woman who has been in her job long enough to have very high standards for what outrages her and has just encountered something that clears them comfortably. She opened the top folder on her desk and turned to a specific page. "The payments to the Dursley family. Quarterly disbursements from the Potter estate, authorized by Dumbledore in his capacity as magical guardian. Starting 6 months after my parents died," Harry said. "Yes." She turned another page. "The property freeze on Godric's Hollow. The classification that requires the Chief Warlock's approval, which is to say, Dumbledore's approval, for you to access your own family home." Another page. "The memory charms. 47, placed over 5 years beginning when you were 22 months old." She looked up. "In my career, I have investigated a significant number of cases of magical misconduct. I want to be clear with you, Mr. Potter, that the scope of what I'm looking at here is unusual. This is not one decision made in a moment of poor judgment. This is a sustained, deliberate campaign to control a child's development, legal independence, and inheritance." "Yes," Harry said. "And the child is you?" "Yes." She set the folder down and looked at him, not with pity, he noted. "With something more useful. The challenge," she said, "is that Dumbledore is who he is. Chief Warlock. Supreme Mugwump. Man credited with ending 2 wars. Filing a formal investigation against him will not be quiet. It will be contested. His supporters, and he has many, they are powerful, and they believe in him completely, will argue that whatever actions he took were justified by circumstances. They will argue the memory charms were protective. They will argue the estate management was responsible." She paused. "They will argue that a 7-year-old boy cannot be the reliable principal witness against the most respected man in the wizarding world." "What would make them wrong?" Harry asked. Bones almost smiled. "Not quite. Evidence they can't reframe. The Gringotts verification is strong, but on its own it's still Gringotts versus Dumbledore's word, and there are people on the Wizengamot who will choose his word by reflex." She tapped the folder. "What changes the equation is living circumstance. If I investigate your current housing situation with the Dursleys and find what I expect I'll find, you will, Harry said simply. Then we have a documented case of magical guardian neglect. Which is a separate charge, but which in combination with the estate mismanagement and the memory charm tampering creates a pattern that is very difficult to argue as coincidental. She looked at him. I'll need to visit Privet Drive. I won't be there. I don't need you there. I need them there. She made a note. You're staying at the Leaky Cauldron? Yes. Good. Stay there. She looked at Fiara. The emancipation petition, is it filed? Prepared, Fiara said. Not filed. We were waiting on the investigation. File it, Bones said. File it today. The investigation will take approximately 2 to 3 weeks for a preliminary finding. In the meantime, the petition creates a legal record that establishes you as seeking independent status, which makes it significantly harder for anyone to argue that you should be returned to your magical guardian's sphere of influence while the investigation is live. Someone might try to do that? Harry asked. Dumbledore might try to do that, Bones said, without inflection. He knows you've been to Gringotts. I imagine he doesn't know the extent of what was found, but a man who placed 47 memory charms on a child is a man who monitors his work. He will be aware that something has changed. She looked at Harry with the direct, practical look of someone who respects intelligence in others and speaks to it accordingly. He will not do anything aggressive. That is not his method. His method is to be helpful, to be present, to offer himself as the solution to problems he's actually the cause of. He will try to reinsert himself as your protector. Harry thought of Tuesday morning in the Leaky Cauldron. Is there anything I can help with? I met him Monday, he said. Bones' eyebrows moved. He approached you. He was at the Leaky Cauldron. He seemed to be passing through. He sat down, said hello, asked if I needed anything. What did you tell him? That I had everything sorted. A pause. Bones studied him across the desk with the expression of someone updating a calculation. And he accepted that? He seemed surprised, Harry said. But he accepted it. He'll be back, she said. Differently, next time. She stood, which signaled the end of the meeting in the same quiet way Ragnar's standing had. File the petition today. Don't go to Privet Drive. Don't speak to anyone about the complaint or the investigation until you hear from me. And, a brief pause, the first moment of anything that wasn't pure professionalism, take care of yourself. What's been done to you should not have been done to anyone, and this office will treat it accordingly. Harry nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me. Let me do my job. She looked at Fiara. I'll be in touch within the week. They went back through the ministry in the same purposeful way they'd arrived. Harry was quiet in the lift, and in the atrium, and through the flue back to the Leaky Cauldron, and Fiara, who had the same quality as Ragnar of understanding when silence was more useful than conversation, said nothing until they were back in the alley and Harry had his feet on ground he recognized. She'll do it, Fiara said. She meant what she said. I know, Harry said. He had been fairly sure from about the 3rd minute of the meeting. The petition will be filed by 5 this evening. Good. Harry turned the leather case over in his hands. I want to ask Ragnar something. He's available tomorrow morning. Can you ask him about Sirius Black? Fiara looked at him. Her expression did not change in any dramatic way, but she had very precise eyes and something in them sharpened. Peter Pettigrew's case. Harry turned to look at her. What about Peter Pettigrew? A beat, the beat of someone deciding something. Pettigrew was the 4th member of the group your parents belonged to at Hogwarts. He was the one who actually turned them in to Voldemort. He is the one who killed the 13 Muggles, the witnesses, to cover his tracks. And then he faked his own death and framed Sirius Black for all of it. She said it with the flat precision of someone relating established fact. This is Gringotts' assessment, based on our independent investigation conducted in 1982, when we were auditing the events of October 31st for insurance purposes pertaining to the Godric's Hollow property. Harry stared at her. Gringotts knows Sirius Black is innocent. Gringotts knows the evidence strongly suggests it, Fiara said carefully. The formal assessment was filed. It was never formally responded to by the ministry. By the DMLE. At the time, yes. The DMLE's position was that the case was closed. Who was head of the DMLE in 1982? A pause. That would have been Bartemius Crouch Sr. Harry was quiet for a moment. Not Bones. No. Bones was appointed much later. Fiara kept her tone scrupulously neutral. The assessment is on file. It can be provided to the current DMLE investigation as supplementary documentation. Add it, Harry said immediately. Add it to everything Bones gets. Fiara nodded, once, with the precise efficiency of someone for whom yes did not require additional words. Harry stood on the cobblestones of Diagon Alley in his new clothes and his new glasses, with his leather case on his shoulder and his parents' voices somewhere deep in his chest, and he thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban, 6 years, for something he hadn't done, while the man who'd done it was alive somewhere and Dumbledore had arranged the case that put an innocent man in the worst prison in the world. Whether Dumbledore had known was a question Harry filed away. Whether it would matter, legally, was another. What mattered right now was that Bones had the Gringotts assessment, and Bones read everything she was given, and Bones was someone who acted on evidence. He thought about his father's memories, the peripheral, beloved figure with the loud laugh and the absolute trust, leaning across a room full of firelight. He was going to get Sirius out. He didn't know yet how long it would take. He didn't know what obstacles were coming. He was 7 years old and his legal standing was still being assembled and the most powerful wizard in Britain was watching him from a careful distance. None of this changed the calculation. It just told him the calculation was large. He was fine with large. He went inside and picked up his book and kept reading. Chapter 3, The Shape of a Cage. The letter from Amelia Bones arrived on Friday morning, 7 days after their meeting. Harry was in the middle of breakfast, eggs and toast, which he had taken to ordering with the specific satisfaction of someone who had spent several years subsisting largely on whatever the Dursleys decided wasn't worth finishing, when Tom brought it to his table with the particular expression he developed for Harry's mail, which was something between curiosity and a very professional decision not to ask questions. The letter was not long. Mr. Potter, I visited Privet Drive on Wednesday. I have completed my preliminary assessment of the living conditions at number 4. My findings will be included in the formal investigation file. I am also in receipt of the supplementary documentation provided by Gringotts regarding the Sirius Black case. That matter has been opened as a separate but related inquiry. The emancipation petition is progressing through the standard review process. Given the circumstances documented in the Gringotts file, I have flagged it for expedited consideration. One additional matter, Albus Dumbledore's office contacted the DMLE on Thursday requesting a briefing on any active investigations relevant to the Potter account. This is an unusual request and I declined it. I mention it so you are aware. You will hear from me within 10 days. Bones. Harry folded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket alongside all the others. He finished his breakfast. He looked out the window at Diagon Alley waking up, the shop owners pulling back their shutters, the first customers appearing, the general morning industry of a street that had things to do. Dumbledore had asked about him. Formally. Through official channels. Harry thought about the word unusual that Bones had used, and about what it meant that the most trusted man in the wizarding world had made a move that even a senior ministry official had found unusual enough to mention. It meant he was worried. Not panicked, someone like Dumbledore didn't panic, he adjusted. But worried enough to do something he wouldn't normally need to do, because normally things simply went the way he arranged them. Harry was a new variable in a system that had been running smoothly for 6 years without one. He was fine with that. He paid for his breakfast, went upstairs, and spent the morning writing. He'd been doing this every day since the Echo opened, not journaling, nothing that personal, but a working document. Everything he knew, everything he'd observed, every question he still had and what answering it might require. His mother's voice, reconstructed as faithfully as he could, organized into the specific arguments and warnings she'd delivered. His father's stories and what they revealed about the landscape of trust and betrayal in the years before October 1981. A timeline. A map of connections. A list of what Dumbledore controlled: Hogwarts, the Wizengamot, the International Confederation of Wizards, his own order, the Ministry by proximity and influence if not by direct authority, and a separate list of where the edges of that control frayed. Bones was an edge. Gringotts was an edge. Sirius, if freed, would be an edge. He wrote Peter Pettigrew, location, with 3 question marks and circled it, because that was the problem he couldn't see the solution to yet. If Pettigrew was alive and Gringotts suspected it, then finding him was the thing that would make Sirius's case not just a matter of reopening a poorly handled investigation but a matter of proof. Concrete, undeniable, impossible to reframe proof. He didn't know where Pettigrew was. His parents' memories didn't include anything helpful on that front. His father's stories about Pettigrew were affectionate, not suspicious, because James had died not knowing who had betrayed them. That particular knowledge had gone with him, and what was left in the Echo was a picture of a friendship, not a record of a crime. He stared at the circled question for a while. Then he wrote, underneath it, ask Ragnarok if the 1982 assessment has anything on current whereabouts. He underlined it twice and moved on. The meeting with Ragnarok the next morning was not what he expected. He arrived at Gringotts at 9, punctual, which he'd learned Ragnarok found relevant, and was shown to the director's office by one of the junior goblins who had taken to nodding at him with the familiarity of someone who had decided he was a fixture worth acknowledging. Ragnarok was at his desk, but he wasn't alone. Barcella was there, standing at the bookshelf on the far wall with her arms folded, and there was a third goblin Harry hadn't met, broader than either of them, older, with the kind of face that looked like it had been through several centuries of weather. Harry Potter, Ragnarok said. Sit. This is Urgok. He is our head of investigative records. He has something for you. Urgok looked at Harry with the frank, evaluating look they all seemed to have, then reached into the leather satchel at his hip and produced a folder that was older than the others, the leather softened with time, the clasp slightly tarnished. 1982 assessment, he said, setting it on the desk in front of Harry. You asked about Pettigrew's location. Is there anything? Not directly. But there is something that becomes relevant in context. Urgok pulled out the relevant page. Harry could see it had several sections and a set of notations in red ink that looked like they'd been added later, possibly by a different hand. Pettigrew was a registered animagus. His form was a rat. The registration was standard, ministry record, dated 1978. However, he paused, turned the page, in the aftermath of the events of October 31, 1981, when we were auditing the Godric's Hollow property damage for insurance purposes, our investigator noted an anomaly in the magical residue at the scene. Specifically, there was an animagus transformation signature present in the magical debris. Recent. Not from the primary magical event, the killing curse, the explosion, the structural collapse. From after. Harry looked at the page. The red notation read, trans sig, small mammal, post-event, directional WSW, he transformed and ran, Harry said. That is our assessment, yes. So he's been a rat somewhere for 6 years. Possibly. Or he resumed human form at some point. We don't know. Urgok took the page back and returned it to the folder. What we do know is that he is almost certainly alive, and that the ministry's conclusion that he was killed, that Black killed him, destroyed his body with the exception of a single finger, was not supported by the evidence at the scene, which no one from the DMLE ever formally examined. The case was closed before they looked, Harry said. Bartemius Crouch Sr. had him in Azkaban within 48 hours, Urgok said. No trial. The 3 goblins let that sit in the air for a moment. Harry let it sit with them. No trial, he said, quietly. Azkaban without trial, Ragnarok said, is technically legal in cases of extreme dark magical activity, under a wartime provision Crouch himself pushed through the Wisengamot in 1979. A beat. The wartime provision expired in 1983. Black's continued detention after that point relies on the original finding being upheld. The original finding was never formally challenged. Until now, Harry said. Until now, Ragnarok agreed. Harry sat with the folder in front of him and thought about Sirius Black, who had watched his best friends die, been framed for their deaths and for murders he didn't commit, and been sent to Azkaban in 48 hours without anyone asking a single question. Without a trial. Without so much as a formal charge sheet. Bones has the assessment, he said. She received it Monday. Fiara confirmed she acknowledged it. And the Animaga's signature is in the assessment. She will have read it. Urgok straightened up, folder back in his satchel. Whether she acts on it is her prerogative. She will, Harry said. None of the three goblins contradicted him, which felt like its own kind of endorsement. 3 days later, a Friday, Harry Potter made page 5 of the Daily Prophet. He didn't see it coming. Not because he'd been careless, he'd been quite deliberate about his movements, staying in Diagon Alley, keeping his conversations at Gringotts and with Fiara, but because the leak didn't come from anything he'd done. It came from Privet Drive. Tom brought the paper with his breakfast. The headline on page 5 was not large, but it was specific: missing, boy WHO lives whereabouts unknown, family reports unexplained absence. Harry read it. He was eating toast at the time and he kept eating the toast, because the toast was still good and his opinion of the situation hadn't changed. The article was short and factually sparse, which meant it was working primarily on implication. The Dursleys had apparently contacted someone, the article didn't say who, but the phrasing suggested ministry involvement, after Harry had been missing for nearly 2 weeks. The article noted that prominent figures in the wizarding community have expressed concern for the boy's welfare, which was careful language for something that meant Dumbledore had contacted the prophet without doing so directly enough to be quoted. Harry put the paper down and sent a note to Fiara and a separate note to Bones, both via the Leaky Cauldron's in-house owl service. Then he finished his breakfast. Fiara arrived within the hour, which meant she'd been expecting something like this. The article is careful, she said, sitting across from him, her briefcase flat on the table between them. It doesn't say you're in danger or that anything criminal has occurred. It creates concern without creating liability. She looked at him. This is Dumbledore's way of building public pressure. If people believe you're missing and vulnerable, any investigation into your circumstances becomes framed as the investigation of the people who are looking for you, rather than the investigation of Dumbledore himself. He's inverting it, Harry said. Making himself the rescuer. Yes. So what do we do? Fiara opened her briefcase and produced a document. We make you visible on our terms, not his. Gringotts can issue a statement confirming that you visited this bank as a client in good standing, that you are residing in legal and comfortable circumstances, and that you are not missing. We do not say where you are. We do not say what you are doing here. We simply establish that you are not a crisis. That works, Harry said. And Bones? She can corroborate through the DMLE that they are aware of your whereabouts as part of an active investigation. Not the details of the investigation, just that it exists and that you are a cooperative participant in it. Fiara closed the briefcase. This limits what Dumbledore can do publicly. He cannot very well push harder for your return once it's on record that you are a participant in a DMLE investigation. Harry thought about it. Won't that tell him more about what the investigation is? It will tell him an investigation exists with DMLE involvement. He likely already suspects that. Fiara looked at him steadily. What it also does is put you in the record as someone who sought out the system rather than someone the system needs to find. It shifts the frame significantly. Do it, Harry said. By the end of the day, the Gringotts statement was issued and the DMLE confirmation was filed with the Prophet's editorial desk. Tom showed Harry the evening edition, page 7, small box, near the bottom. Gringotts confirms Potter's safe status, DMLE investigation ongoing. It was almost boring in its simplicity. Harry thought that was probably appropriate. That evening, sitting by his window with the cat from the courtyard, having finally decided that Harry's windowsill was an acceptable destination, Harry thought about what came next. The emancipation petition was in process. The investigation was live. Sirius's case was being reopened as a related inquiry. The Gringotts verification of Dumbledore's magical signature was due Sunday, which would complete the chain of evidence. Things were moving. The cage his life had been arranged into was coming apart at the seams, legally and methodically, piece by piece. He was not relaxed about this. Relaxed was for people who thought they'd already won, and he was clear-eyed enough to know that what he'd set in motion was not a settled thing yet. Dumbledore had not responded in any visible way, which meant he was responding in invisible ways, and invisible responses from a man of his particular skill were things to be watched for carefully. But Harry was 7 years old, and he had spent 6 years of his life in a cupboard, and for the first time in conscious memory he was somewhere safe and dry and warm, with food he'd chosen himself and books he wanted to read and a legal structure assembling itself around him like armor. He let himself have the moment. His mother would have approved of that too, she'd said, in the echo, let yourself feel the good things. Don't spend it all on what's wrong. You'll need the good things. They're what you're fighting for. The cat bumped its head against his hand. He scratched its ears. Sunday's third verification came through as expected. Fiara sent a note that arrived at 7 in the morning, while Harry was still mostly asleep. Third verification complete. Dumbledore's signature confirmed. Full verified record filed with the Gringotts archive. Copies dispatched to DMLE. Ragnarok requests your presence this afternoon at your convenience. Harry was at Gringotts by 2 o'clock. Ragnarok had the full verification document on his desk, not the fat folder from before, but a single sealed document in a black binding that had a particular formal weight to it, the kind of object that had been designed to be used in legal proceedings and knew it. He handed it to Harry without preamble. That is your copy, he said. The document confirms that 47 memory charms placed on your person between the dates of August 1982 and October 1986 were cast using a magical signature that is, to a 99.7% statistical certainty, that of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. It also confirms that the resonance echo placed in your magical core by your parents was deliberately suppressed as part of the same systematic effort. He folded his hands. This document, combined with the DMLE investigation and the estate records, constitutes a complete formal case. Harry held the document and thought about the number. 99.7%. What happens to the 0.3%, he asked. The 0.3% is the legal space in which Dumbledore's lawyers will operate, Ragnarok said. They will argue that signature matching is not proof of intent. They will argue that the charms could have been placed by someone mimicking his signature, theoretically possible, practically implausible. They will argue that his actions as magical guardian were within the scope of his legal authority and taken in good faith. He picked up his quill. It will not be enough. You're confident? No, Ragnarok said. Confident is what people are when they haven't done the work. I have done the work. I am certain. Harry almost smiled. He put the document in his leather case. He looked at Ragnarok across the desk, this person who had, in the space of 2 weeks, become something Harry didn't quite have a word for. Not a friend, exactly, Ragnarok would have found that reductive. Not just an ally either, because the word ally was too strategic and too cold for what Harry had actually experienced, which was something closer to being taken seriously by someone for whom taking people seriously was not casual. I want to ask you something that's not about the investigation, Harry said. Ragnarok raised an eyebrow. When I go to Hogwarts? In 4 years. He paused, organizing the thought. I'm going to need people there who know the truth. Who aren't just operating on the version of me that Dumbledore was going to arrange. You want to know if we have relationships within Hogwarts. I want to know if there are people I can trust. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Hogwarts is Dumbledore's school in all practical senses. The castle itself is older than any of them and does not belong to any headmaster, but the faculty serves under him and the day-to-day reality is his. He set down the quill. There are 2 staff members of whom I am aware who have expressed views that do not align neatly with Dumbledore's management of the school. One is Minerva McGonagall, who is his deputy and who is loyal to him but whose loyalty has limits that she herself may not have fully tested. The other is Phileas Flitwick, who is a former goblin dueling champion, is half goblin himself, and maintains a professional relationship with Gringotts that is, let us say, based on candor rather than politics. Flitwick, Harry said. He would be your charms professor. He is, in my estimation, the finest teacher at Hogwarts, and he is not interested in managing anyone's potential downward. Ragnarok picked up the quill again, which usually meant the meeting was approaching its end. I can arrange an introduction, when the time comes. Off the record. Thank you. Harry stood and picked up the leather case. He looked at Ragnarok. And what about now? The next 4 years, before Hogwarts. What do I do with them? Ragnarok looked at him over the quill with those very dark, very still eyes. Learn, he said. Everything. Faster than they expect you to. That's the plan, Harry said. He meant it the way Ragnarok had meant certain, not casually, not as aspiration. As description. Bones called the meeting for the following Thursday. Not a letter this time, an official summons, delivered by 2 ministry owls simultaneously, one to Harry and one to Fiara, which meant this was a formal proceeding rather than an informal briefing. The venue was Level 2, DMLE offices, Conference Room B. The time was 10 in the morning. The notation at the bottom said, Mr. Potter may bring 1 Gringotts representative. This meeting will be attended by additional ministry personnel. Harry and Fiara arrived at 5 to 10 to find that additional ministry personnel was a characteristically restrained description of what was waiting in Conference Room B. Amelia Bones was there, standing at the head of a long table, with 3 Aurors seated to her right and a woman Harry didn't recognize on her left, tall, narrow-faced, with sharp eyes and a senior undersecretary badge on her robes. There was a Wisengamot seal on the folder in front of Bones, which meant this had already been elevated beyond a departmental investigation. And standing at the far end of the room, near the window, with his back to the London skyline and his hands folded in front of him and a look of careful, warm concern on his face, was Albus Dumbledore. Harry walked in and took the seat he was directed to without breaking stride, without glancing around the room for reactions, without giving any indication that finding Dumbledore in the room was anything other than a neutral data point. He set his leather case on the table and settled in his chair and looked at Bones. Let's begin, Bones said. Dumbledore moved to his seat, not at the table's head, where Bones was, but at the side, which was calculated. A position of participation, not authority. Harry noted it. This meeting, Bones said, is a preliminary findings conference for the active investigation into DMLE File 1143-87, concerning the welfare and legal standing of Harry James Potter, age 7. Present as witness and principal party is Mr. Potter himself. Present as legal representative from Gringotts Bank is account manager Fiara. Present as magical guardian of record is Albus Dumbledore, who was notified of this meeting in his legal capacity. She paused. This conference is being recorded. Dumbledore looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has just seen something for the second time and is now sure of what they're seeing. It was not hostile, nothing about him was hostile, and Harry thought that might be the most genuinely frightening thing about him. He looked at Harry the way someone looks at a child they are very worried about, and the worry was not performed. He genuinely believed he had reason to be worried, which meant his concern and his culpability were not separate things but the same thing wearing different faces. Mr. Potter, Bones said. For the record, Can you confirm that you traveled to Gringotts Bank on the 14th of June of this year of your own volition?
Yes, Harry said.
That you consented to the heritage assessment conducted on that date?
Yes.
That no person compelled or coerced your visit or your consent?
No.
I took the appointment letter from my uncle, who had kept it from me, and I traveled to London on my own.
Bones looked at her notes and made a mark.
Mr. Dumbledore, she said, and her tone shifted, still professional, but with a precision that had an edge in it. For the record, can you confirm that you are Harry Potter's registered magical guardian?
I am, Dumbledore said.
His voice was warm and grave and managed, perfectly, to convey both authority and pain, which Harry supposed was what happened when you had spent decades being the most important person in every room. And I want to say, before we proceed, that I am deeply relieved that Harry is safe, and that I take full responsibility for any failures in my guardianship that this process may reveal.
It was a masterful thing to say.
It preempted, it acknowledged, it framed the entire proceeding as a matter of his taking responsibility rather than being held responsible, which were the same event with entirely different power dynamics.
Several people in the room visibly relaxed.
The senior undersecretary made a note.
Harry looked at Bones.
Bones looked at her folder.
Mr. Dumbledore, she said, can you explain the 47 memory charms placed on Harry Potter between August 1982 and October 1986, whose magical signature has been verified to 99.7% certainty as yours?
The room went very still.
Dumbledore's expression did not collapse. It shifted, the warmth remained, but something behind it reorganized. He took a breath that was slightly longer than necessary.
The memory charms were placed with Harry's welfare as my primary concern, he said.
In the immediate aftermath of Voldemort's attack, Harry was showing signs of severe magical trauma, flashbacks, nightmares, violent magical outbursts that were dangerous to those around him. The charms were placed to suppress traumatic memories and allow him to develop normally.
All 47 of them, Bones said.
The number reflects the ongoing nature of his traumatic response. Some required refreshing.
The Gringotts assessment identifies several of the charms as specifically targeting his parents' resonance echo, protective legacy casting made by Lily and James Potter before their deaths.
Bones looked up.
How does suppressing his parents' messages to him constitute managing traumatic response?
A pause.
Just a fraction longer than his previous responses. The echo contained material that I assessed would cause Harry significant distress at an age when he could not process it healthily. I made a judgment call that it should be available to him when he was older and better equipped. It was available to him when his magical core fully developed, Bones said.
At approximately 14.
Your most recent charm, placed in October 1986, suppressed it beyond that threshold.
She set the page down flat.
You didn't delay his access.
You blocked it.
The distinction is exactly the difference between guardianship and control.
Bones said it quietly, which made it louder than shouting would have.
She moved to the next page.
The estate payments to the Dursley family.
300 galleons quarterly, authorized as a maintenance contribution.
Can you explain those?
I wanted to ensure Harry had a comfortable home, Dumbledore said.
We visited the home, one of the Aurors said from Bones' right.
It was the first time he'd spoken.
His voice was careful and flat.
He was living in a cupboard under the stairs.
The family had a second bedroom unused, which they gave to their son as a toy storage room.
The primary bedroom was used by the adults.
The cupboard measured approximately 4 feet by 3.
He looked at his notes. There were several of the child's personal items, a small blanket, 2 books, that appeared to have been in the cupboard for some years, based on condition. The silence after this was different from the others. It had weight in it that couldn't be talked around. Dumbledore's expression was now something Harry couldn't entirely read, and he was quite good at reading it. It was not guilt, or if it was buried under so many layers of self-justification and genuine belief that it had become something else, something that looked like a man genuinely struggling with the gap between his intentions and their reality. He said, I was unaware of the extent of the the blood protection required proximity, Bones said. I understand the theory. It's documented in the original placement recommendation you filed with Gringotts. She turned another page. What the blood protection did not require was a specific address or a specific family. It required a blood relative. There were other options: Lily Potter's maternal cousin, who is alive and currently residing in Edinburgh. The child would have been within blood protection range. She was not considered. She wasn't in a position, she owns a home, she is employed, and she had no history of any kind that would have made her a concerning guardian, Bones said. She was, however, a muggle with no awareness of the wizarding world, and therefore someone with no capacity to monitor or report on Harry's development to the wizarding community. She let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. Whereas Petunia Dursley, who is aware of the wizarding world's existence, was chosen. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Just for a moment. It was the first time since the meeting started that he'd looked at him directly, and the look was complicated. It was the look of a man who was enormously intelligent and who understood, with full clarity, that this meeting was not going the way he had arranged things to go for the last 6 years. And who was trying, in real time, to determine what he thought about the person responsible for that. Harry looked back at him. His expression was even. His hands were flat on the table. He didn't look away. Dumbledore looked away first. The findings of this preliminary conference, Bones said, addressing the room, are as follows. 1. The living situation at Privet Drive constitutes documented magical guardian neglect, and Harry Potter will not be returning there. 2. The verified Gringotts record of memory charm placement warrants a formal Wisengamot inquiry, which I am referring to the senior panel today. 3. The estate management decisions are under full legal review and all of Dumbledore's administrative access to the Potter estate is suspended pending that review. She looked at Dumbledore directly. This investigation is active, Mr. Dumbledore. I expect your full cooperation. Of course, Dumbledore said. He said it the way he said everything, warmly, without apparent resistance, with the smooth grace of someone who had survived worse. But Harry watched his hands, which were still folded, and there was something in the set of them that had not been there at the start of the meeting. Harry, Bones said, turning to him, the emancipation petition has been approved for expedited review. Given the documented circumstances, the board has agreed to hear it at the end of the month. In the meantime, your current residence at the Leaky Cauldron is formally designated as safe housing under DMLE supervision. You may remain there. She looked at him with the same direct, frank gaze she'd had from the beginning. Do you have questions? 1, Harry said. What about Sirius Black? The senior undersecretary wrote something very quickly. One of the Aurors looked at the table. Dumbledore was very still. Bones said, the Black inquiry is proceeding. We are locating case files. The matter of Pettigrew's animagus status is being reviewed. She held his gaze. It will take time. I know, Harry said. I just wanted to make sure it's still in motion. It is, Bones said. Dumbledore said nothing. This was, Harry thought, the most significant thing he'd done in the entire meeting, said absolutely nothing about Sirius Black, in a room full of people where saying nothing was a choice. The meeting ended. People gathered their papers and their coats and their expressions with the efficiency of people who had just been through something significant and needed a moment away from it. The Aurors left first. The senior undersecretary left. Fiara gathered the Gringotts documentation and stood. Dumbledore was the last to leave. At the door, he stopped. Harry had not moved from his chair. Dumbledore turned and looked at him, just the two of them now, Bones still at the head of the table reading through something, pointedly occupied. Dumbledore looked at Harry with the full weight of his attention, which was a very considerable thing, and which Harry felt the way you feel weather approaching, a change in pressure, a shift in the air. You are extraordinary, Harry, Dumbledore said quietly. I want you to know that. Whatever else you think of me. Harry looked at him. He thought about his father's voice, don't let anyone tell you that your power belongs to them, and about the 47 careful violations stacked up behind this moment. And he said, with complete composure, I know. My parents told me. Dumbledore left. Bones looked up from her documents. She met Harry's eyes briefly. Something in her expression, just for a moment, was not purely professional. Well done, she said quietly. Harry picked up his leather case. He walked out of the ministry and into the cool London afternoon and felt, for the first time in all of this, something that was almost physical, a sensation of something shifting. Not victory. He wasn't close to victory yet and he knew it. But the shape of the cage was visible now, which meant the cage was already different from what it had been. You couldn't see the shape of something without changing your relationship to it. His parents had been trapped behind walls they'd built with someone they trusted, and those walls had closed around them. He had seen the walls. He had mapped them. He was 7 years old and he was already outside them, and the man who built them had just heard, in a conference room with ministry seals on everything, that the structure of what he'd built was being taken apart piece by piece. Harry took the tube back to Waterloo because he felt like it. He liked the underground, the specific democracy of it, everyone going somewhere, no one owing anyone anything, the rumble and the dark and the light arriving at the end of the tunnel as a matter of simple physics rather than anyone's permission. He got back to the Leaky Cauldron at 4 in the afternoon. Tom was behind the bar and looked up when he came in with the expression he always had now, which had evolved over 3 weeks from curious to something more like invested, and which Harry found quietly warming. There's someone here for you, Tom said, with an expression Harry couldn't read. Been here about an hour. Wouldn't say who he is. Just said you'd know. Harry stopped. Where? Back table. Left side. Harry walked through the bar. Most of the tables were empty at this hour. At the back, left side, a man was sitting with a drink he hadn't touched and a posture that suggested he had spent some time choosing how to arrange himself and was not happy with any of the options. He was wearing Muggle clothes that didn't fit him quite right, a jacket too large, trousers slightly short, and he had sharp, dark eyes and an angular face, and he was watching Harry walk toward him with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not entirely managing it. Harry didn't know who he was. He was certain he'd never met him. He sat down across from the man. I don't know your name, Harry said. Lupin, the man said. His voice was rough, slightly. Like someone who didn't use it much. Remus Lupin. I was at school with your parents. We were friends. He stopped. Started again. I've been following the Prophet. The articles about you. I wanted to make sure you were all right. Harry looked at him, really looked, the way he'd been learning to look at people, for the specific texture of what they actually meant as opposed to what they said. Remus Lupin looked like someone who had spent a significant portion of recent years being held together by something that was not optimism. He looked like someone who was here because not being here was worse, even though being here was clearly costing him something. You were his friend, Harry said. My dad's. One of his best, Lupin said, and the past tense of it was in his voice like a bruise. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Do you know anything about what happened to Sirius Black? Lupin flinched. Just slightly. The involuntary movement of someone who has a wound being touched. Why do you ask that? Because I've been looking into it, Harry said. And I think he was innocent. The silence that followed was long, and the texture of it changed as it went. Lupin's face moved through several things, none of them simple, all of them belonging to someone for whom this question had sat in the darkest drawer for 6 years. When he finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. I've thought the same thing, he said. For a long time. And never known what to do with it. Harry looked at him across the table in the afternoon light of the Leaky Cauldron, with his leather case on his lap and his parents' voices in his chest, and he said, I do. Chapter 4, Sirius Remus Lupin was not, Harry discovered over the next 2 hours, the kind of person who told you everything at once.
He told things in layers, carefully, the way someone handles something old and fragile that they've been carrying for a long time and are not yet sure is safe to set down. He drank his untouched drink slowly once he started talking and ordered a second one without appearing to notice he'd done it, and he spoke about James and Lily and Sirius and Peter the way people speak about things that are simultaneously very far away and very close, with a kind of precision that was also a kind of distance, because precision was the only way to keep the distance from collapsing. Harry listened without interrupting, which seemed to be what was needed. Lupin told him about Hogwarts. About the four of them, James, Sirius, Remus, Peter, the specific, sealed-off world of that friendship, the kind you only make when you're young enough that trust is still a thing you give completely rather than calculate. He told it without sentimentality, and Harry liked that. It would have been easy to make it soft and golden, and Lupin chose not to, and that choice felt like honesty. He told Harry about the animagus transformations, all three of them, James and Sirius and Peter, who had become an unregistered stag, a great black dog, and a small grey rat, for Lupin's benefit, so that Lupin's monthly condition would not mean facing it alone. He said this part quietly, with a flatness that was not unemotional but that had decided emotion was not something to put on the table right now. Then he stopped talking and looked at Harry with those dark, careful eyes. "You already knew about Pettigrew being an animagus," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Gringotts found a transformation signature at Godric's Hollow," Harry said. "After the fact. He ran. They think he's been in rat form somewhere for 6 years." Lupin closed his eyes briefly. "Of course he has," he said, very quietly. Not surprised. The particular not surprised of someone who already knew the answer and had just had it confirmed. Somewhere close to people who'd feed him without asking questions. Somewhere with a regular supply of food and no one looking too hard. He opened his eyes. A wizarding family. With children, probably. He'd want the chaos. Harry filed this. "We need to find him." "I know." Lupin turned his glass on the table. "I've known for 6 years that something was wrong about it. But knowing and being able to do anything," he stopped. I'm not in a strong position legally or socially. I'm a werewolf. I don't have a stable income. I couldn't walk into the ministry and say I think Peter Pettigrew is alive and Sirius Black is innocent without them concluding I was delusional or dishonest or both." "Bones is opening the inquiry," Harry said. "It's already in motion." "I heard. That's partly why I'm here." He looked at Harry steadily. "I wanted to know who you were. What kind of person was doing this?" A pause. James would have. He stopped again, and something crossed his face that was too unguarded to be anything but genuine. "You look like him, you know. Exactly like him." He didn't finish the sentence. Harry let it sit. He thought about the peripheral figure in his father's memories, the laugh, the absolute trust. He thought about someone who had spent 6 years carrying the weight of a grief that also came with the specific poison of doubt, never sure enough to act on it, too sure to put it down. "I need you to tell Bones everything you just told me," Harry said. "About the animagus forms. About Pettigrew's habits, his personality, where he'd go. You knew him. That's evidence she doesn't have." "They won't take my word." "She will," Harry said. "She's not Crouch. She reads what she's given and she follows it." He looked at Lupin. "I'll set up the meeting. You just have to show up and tell the truth." Lupin looked at him for a long moment. The particular look of someone who has been handing a thing alone for so long that the offer of help feels almost more than they know what to do with. "All right," he said. "Good." Harry stood. "Where are you staying?" "I have a room in Muggle London." It's fine. "Stay here," Harry said. "The rooms are decent. Tom doesn't ask questions." He looked down at Lupin from the standing position that still put him well below most adults his age. "We need you accessible.
Lupin's expression did something complicated that eventually landed on something that was almost a smile. "You're 7 years old," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "Are you going to stay?" "Yes," Lupin said. The meeting between Lupin and Bones happened 4 days later, in a small conference room that was less formal than Conference Room B and had the feeling of something arranged deliberately off the main record, not illegal, but deliberate. Bones had chosen it, Harry suspected, because she wanted to hear what Lupin had to say without the weight of official scrutiny making him careful. Harry was not in the room for it. This had been Bones' condition, gently stated, and he'd agreed without argument. Fiara was there as his representative and as a witness. Lupin had spent 2 evenings with Harry preparing, going over what he knew and how to say it, and by the time Thursday came he was as ready as someone who had been carrying something this heavy for this long could be. Harry waited in the corridor on a bench that was too high for him, feet not quite reaching the floor, and read the Goblin Banking Law book for the 3rd time because there were still things in it he hadn't fully extracted yet. Lupin came out after an hour and 40 minutes looking like someone who had set something down and wasn't yet sure they were glad they had. He sat on the bench beside Harry and said nothing for a moment. "How did it go?" Harry asked, not looking up from the book. "She asked good questions," Lupin said. "The kind you ask when you already mostly know the answer and you need the witness to get there themselves so it's clean." A pause. "She's going to issue a formal request for Wisengamot review of the Black case. With my testimony on record and the Gringotts assessment and the animagus information, she thinks there's enough to get the case heard." He stopped. "Actually heard. With evidence and everything. That's what we need." She said. Lupin stopped again. Then, she said even in the best case, even if the case is heard and the evidence is clear, getting Sirius out will take time. There are process requirements. Wisengamot dates. Pettigrew has to be found and confirmed if we want a complete case, otherwise it's still Black's word against a dead man and 12 years of institutional assumption. He looked at his hands. "She was honest about how hard it is." "She usually is," Harry said. She also said, Lupin's voice changed slightly, became quieter, that the file on Black's original detainment is almost shockingly thin. Crouch had him in Azkaban in 48 hours and there's barely 10 pages of paperwork. For a case that was supposedly that clear-cut. He shook his head slowly. No trial. No hearing. No formal charge. Just, decisions made very fast by people who were certain. Dumbledore was certain too, Harry said. Lupin looked at him. You think he knew? Harry closed the book and held it in his lap and thought about the question properly, which it deserved. His parents' echo hadn't covered this directly. His father's memories of Sirius were uniformly trusting. Dumbledore had arranged the Fidelius charm, had been the one to suggest Peter as secret keeper instead of Sirius, according to what Lupin had told him on the first evening. Had suggested it firmly enough that James had accepted it despite his instinct to use Sirius. I think he made a decision, Harry said carefully, that put Peter in a position where betrayal was possible. I don't know if he knew Peter would betray them. I don't know if he let it happen or just failed to prevent it. He looked at Lupin. What I know is that when it happened, when Sirius was arrested, Dumbledore had every reason and every ability to ask a single question: did he get a trial? And there's no record that he did. Lupin was quiet. And then he came to the Dursleys, Harry said, and placed the first of 47 charms on me. 11 days after my parents died. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere along it, a door opened and closed. Merlin, Lupin said, very softly. Yeah, Harry said. The emancipation petition was heard on the last Friday of June. Harry arrived at the Wisengamot hearing room on level 10 with Fiara on one side and Ragnarok himself on the other, which was unusual enough that several of the witches and wizards already in the gallery looked twice. Ragnarok did not come to ministry hearings as a general rule. His presence here was itself a statement, and he had made it deliberately. The panel was 5 members,
3 senior Wisengamot justices and 2 specialists in magical minority law, a narrow but important field that dealt with cases where standard age of majority rules were overridden by circumstance. The chair was a thin, precise witch named Griselda Marchbanks, who had the air of someone who had been doing this since before most of the people in the room were born and was entirely comfortable with that. The case was presented in 3 parts. First, the documented living conditions, the Auror's report from Privet Drive, factual and specific, with photographs. The panel read it without comment, which was more telling than comment would have been. Second, the Gringotts file, the heritage assessment, the verified memory charm record, the estate management decisions. Ragnot presented this section himself, standing at the podium with the flat authority of someone who had been in more important rooms than this and had not been wrong yet. Third, and this was Fiara's addition, which Harry had approved immediately when she suggested it, the resonance echo. Not a transcript of what his parents had said, not a summary, but a certified attestation from Gringotts confirming its existence and its nature, a final message from Lily and James Potter to their son, cast in the most committed form of legacy magic available, systematically blocked for 5 years. Marchbanks looked at this page longer than the others. Then she looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter," she said. "The panel will hear from you directly. In your own words, what is the basis of your petition?" Harry stood. He was not nervous, not in the shallow, social way that other people's attention produced. He was focused, which was a different thing and one he'd learned to trust. He looked at Marchbanks and then at the panel and he said, "My parents left me everything they could before they died. Not just money, not just property, they tried to leave me themselves. Their voices, their warnings, their love. The law gives parents that right. Someone took it from me for 6 years, and I spent 6 years in a cupboard not knowing who I was or where I came from or that anyone had ever cared whether I lived or died. I'm asking this panel to give me the legal standing to make sure that doesn't happen again. Not because I need to be independent, I'm 7, I know what that means. But because I need the legal record to show that what was done to me was wrong, and that I have the right to act in my own interests from now on." He sat down. Marchbanks looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the rest of the panel. The deliberation took 11 minutes. When they came back, Marchbanks had the verdict already written, which suggested the 11 minutes had been procedural courtesy rather than actual uncertainty. "Petition granted," she said. "With conditions appropriate to age, a legal guardian of Harry Potter's own choosing must be named within 60 days, and that guardian must be approved by this panel. The chosen guardian will hold no authority over estate decisions or magical development choices, but will serve as a legal adult representative in matters requiring one." She looked at Harry over her reading spectacles. "You are not fully emancipated in the adult sense. But your legal interests are your own. No one can make decisions for you without your explicit documented consent going forward." Harry nodded. "Do you have a guardian in mind?" she asked. Harry looked at Lupin, who was in the gallery and who had been very still for the last 20 minutes and was currently trying to keep his face neutral with what appeared to be significant effort. "Yes," Harry said. "I do." Lupin agreed immediately. Then he spent about 10 minutes arguing that he was not the right choice for reasons Harry had already considered and dismissed, including the werewolf issue, the financial instability issue, and something about not being what Harry deserved, which Harry interrupted by pointing out that what he deserved and what was available were not always the same thing and that Lupin was, by the available evidence, someone who had loved his parents and who told the truth and who had shown up at the Leaky Cauldron even when it cost him something, and those qualities ranked above financial stability in Harry's assessment. Lupin looked at him after this with the expression he'd had that first evening, the one that was trying to be neutral and failing. "You sound like James," he said, slightly helplessly. "Good," Harry said. "Do you accept?" Lupin accepted. The panel approved him with one dissenting vote from a justice who cited the werewolf question, which Marchbanks overruled on the grounds that lycanthropy was not a legal disqualification for guardianship and never had been. They filed the paperwork. It was done. July arrived and Harry spent it the way he'd been spending all of his time, reading, writing, meeting with Fiara, checking in with Bones' office through the DMLE courier bird that had become as regular a feature of his mornings as breakfast. He and Lupin fell into a kind of rhythm, not a family, not yet, not exactly, but something that had the bones of one. They ate dinner together most nights. Lupin had started teaching him things, not formally, more the way you teach someone when you can't help yourself, when you say "oh, did you know" too many times and it becomes a lesson. He knew an extraordinary amount about magical theory, about the history of the wizarding world, about how spells worked at the mechanical level, and he taught in the way of someone who had at some point deeply loved learning before life had made it hard to love anything. Harry absorbed everything and asked questions that occasionally stopped Lupin mid-sentence because they were going somewhere he hadn't expected. One evening in mid-July, they were working through the theory of Patronus magic. Harry had found it in one of his books and wanted to understand it, which led to Lupin spending 3 hours explaining not just the charm but the entire philosophical underpinning of it, the way it worked by counterposing the darkness with something the darkness couldn't consume, and Lupin said, slightly ruefully, "You understand this faster than most sixth years I've seen try to follow it." "I have good material to work with," Harry said, which was the closest he'd come to talking directly about what was in his chest, the memories and the voices and the specific, aching substance of what he'd been given back. Lupin looked at him and seemed to understand this. He didn't push. He just said, "Yes. You do," and moved on. The serious inquiry progressed slowly in the way that legal machinery always progresses slowly, which was not the same as not progressing. Bones sent weekly updates, brief and factual. The Wisengamot had formally received the case for review. The archived files from Sirius's original detainment had been pulled and were under examination. The question of Pettigrew's whereabouts was live. Harry spent time thinking about the rat. Lupin had said, somewhere close to people who'd feed him without asking questions. A wizarding family with children. Harry turned this over. A rat who was actually a man, hiding in plain sight in someone's home for 6 years. He'd need to be unremarkable. He'd need to be somewhere he could be a rat without anyone thinking anything of it. He'd need to have found the family in the chaotic aftermath of the war and stayed. He wrote to Bones with the question, "Is there a way to flag abnormal rat behavior in wizarding households?" Animagus transformation leaves a residual signature. Gringotts found one at Godric's Hollow. Could the same scan be run on a broader area? Bones wrote back within 2 days, theoretically yes. Practically difficult, scan range is limited and we'd need cause for each property. However, there is a different approach, rats with unusual longevity. A normal rat lives 3 to 4 years. If Pettigrew has been someone's pet since 1981, the animal would be showing its age significantly by now. Looking for family pets in known wizarding areas that are abnormally old could narrow the field. Harry showed this to Lupin at dinner. Lupin read it twice, then looked up. She's right. And a wizarding family with children, he'd want to be comfortable, not just hidden. He'd want to be cared for. He set the letter down. I might know somewhere to start looking. There was a family, the Weasleys. Arthur and Molly. Large family, lots of children, I don't know them well but I knew of them from the order. They had a dozen pets at least, the kind of family that wouldn't think twice about an extra rat showing up. He paused. It's not evidence. It's a lead. Give it to Bones, Harry said. Lupin wrote the letter that night. The first week of August brought 3 things simultaneously, which was how this summer seemed to operate, in clusters rather than sequences. The first was a letter from Hogwarts, not an admissions letter, Harry was still 4 years from that, but a letter from the school's administrative office confirming receipt of his Gringotts file and noting that his academic records had been updated to reflect his correct legal status. At the bottom, in different handwriting from the rest of the letter, was a brief addition, I look forward to meeting you when the time comes. F. Flitwick. Harry read this and felt something that wasn't quite warm but was adjacent to it. He put the letter in the leather case with the others. The second thing was a formal notification from the DMLE,
not from Bones directly but from the department, which meant it was official, that the Wisengamot had set a formal review date for the Sirius Black case. The date was October 14th, 10 weeks away. The notification listed the reviewing panel, which was 5 justices, none of them Dumbledore. Harry sent a copy of this to Lupin immediately, who was out on his monthly difficult night and came back the next morning looking like he'd been through something and read the letter 3 times at the breakfast table without saying anything and then went upstairs and didn't come down until the afternoon. When he came down he looked like someone who had cried and was not going to discuss it. Harry had the eggs warm on the table when he arrived, which he'd done on purpose, and Lupin sat down and ate them and looked at Harry and said, "Thank you," and Harry said, "Don't mention it," and they ate in the particular silence of people who understand each other well enough to not need to fill it. The third thing was harder. It came in the form of another letter, this one in an envelope that had no return address and no seal, just Harry's name in handwriting he didn't recognize. It had been delivered by a school owl, not a Gringotts owl, not a ministry owl, just a generic school owl that Tom had found on the bar that morning. Inside was a single page, handwriting neat and slightly formal. "Mr. Potter, I won't introduce myself here, that would compromise the intention of this letter, and I suspect you are smart enough to understand why. I write to you as someone who works within a system I respect, under a man I have respected for a very long time, and who has recently been required to examine what exactly that respect is built on. I want you to know that there are people watching what is happening this summer and concluding things that they cannot say openly. I cannot say them openly. But I can say this, you are not wrong about what was done to you. And there are people with more access than you currently have who know that. Be careful of October. The hearing will draw attention. Some of that attention will try to use the Black case to destabilize the larger inquiry. They will try to separate the two, to allow the Sirius Black review to proceed and use it to argue that the misconduct investigation is resolved. It is not resolved. Don't let anyone resolve it early. I hope you find what you're looking for." Harry read it 3 times. He took it to Lupin, who read it twice and then looked at Harry and said, "McGonagall. You think?" "The handwriting, I can't be certain. But the phrasing. A man I have respected for a very long time. That's someone who has been at Hogwarts for decades. And the warning about October, that's someone who knows how the Wisengamot operates, who knows what the political play would be." He set the letter down. "She can't act openly. But she wanted you to know." Harry took the letter back and looked at it. He thought about Ragnarok's description, her loyalty has limits that she herself may not have fully tested. Maybe she was starting to test them. He wrote a reply, brief, no name used, and sent it back with the school owl, "Understood. Thank you." October 14th arrived cold and sharp, the London sky the pale grey of something that has decided on overcast as a permanent condition. Harry dressed carefully, not formally, just in clothes that were right, that fit, that were his. He put the leather case over his shoulder. He ate breakfast. He and Lupin went to the ministry in near silence, which was the silence of 2 people who have said everything they need to say and are now simply present in what they've been working toward. The Wisengamot chamber was a place that announced itself, a circular amphitheater arrangement with wooden benches raked upward in tiers and a floor level where the case would be presented. The gallery was full. Harry had expected that, but the density of it was still something to absorb, hundreds of witches and wizards, some in official robes, some not, all of them there for the same reason. Because the name Sirius Black attached to the question innocent? Was a question so significant that even the possibility of it drew a crowd. Sirius was in the chamber. Harry saw him before anything else. He was being held in a chair at the floor level, not restrained, but flanked by 2 Aurors, and he looked like someone who had been through something that had taken most of him and given back approximately 2/3. He was thin in the specific way of someone who had been that thin for long enough that their body had reorganized itself around it. His hair was long and dark and not quite manageable. His eyes were sunken, and there were lines in his face that shouldn't have been there in a man not yet in his 30s, and his hands were still, which was either controlled or the stillness of someone who had learned to move as little as possible.
But his eyes. His eyes were alive. Not fully, not in the open, unguarded way of someone who hasn't been to the worst place in the world. But alive in the specific, determined way of something that has not been extinguished despite considerable effort on the part of circumstance. He was looking at Harry. Harry looked back. It was a strange moment. They had never met. There was no reason for the recognition to be mutual. But Sirius looked at Harry across the chamber floor with an expression that moved through three things in quick succession: shock, grief, and something fierce and quiet that Harry recognized because he'd felt it himself, in the Gringotts chair, when the first lock came off and his mother's perfume arrived out of nowhere. "You know me," that expression said. "You know who I am to them." Harry nodded, once. Sirius's jaw tightened. He looked straight ahead. The hearing took 4 hours. Bones presented the DMLE case, the archival investigation, the documented absence of trial, the Gringotts Animagus signature from Godric's Hollow, the legal analysis of Crouch's wartime provision and its application. She presented it with the comprehensive, evidence-forward authority of someone who had not come here to persuade but to demonstrate, and the difference between those two modes was visible in every choice of phrase. Lupin testified. He spoke about the Animagus secret, about Pettigrew's character, about the night of October 31st and the frantic aftermath during which he had tried to find Sirius and had instead found only the official story being assembled faster than anyone had thought to question it. He spoke clearly and without ornamentation, which was what made it land. The Gringotts representative, not Ragnarok this time, a senior legal attaché, presented the technical assessment. The Animagus transformation signature. The directional residue. The statistical impossibility of a body being entirely destroyed by a wand blast of the described magnitude with only a single finger remaining. The defense panel. Sirius had been assigned one from the Public Wizarding Defender's Office, a sharp young witch named Clearwater who had clearly done her homework, then made the formal argument for wrongful detainment. It was clean and pointed and used Bones' evidence like a scalpel. Dumbledore was in the gallery. He had not been called. He sat in the upper tier with the expression of someone attending a proceeding they believed to be necessary while finding it personally difficult, which was a very exact performance of the thing it was describing, and Harry watched him from his seat in the lower gallery and thought, "You suggested Peter as the secret keeper." He had not included this in the formal case, because he had no documentation of it beyond Lupin's account, which was testimony about a private conversation 6 years old. But he knew. And Dumbledore would know that someone had made that connection, whether or not it was in the file yet. The panel deliberated for 3 hours. The chamber cleared into hallways and corridors and the cafeteria on level 6, and Harry and Lupin found a bench in the main hall and sat on it and waited. Lupin had a cup of tea he wasn't drinking. Harry had the banking law book, which he opened out of habit but didn't read. "Whatever happens today," Lupin said, after a while, "you did this. You know that." "We did this," Harry said. "You were 7 years old when you walked into Gringotts," Lupin said, with a specificity that meant he'd been thinking about it. "Alone. With a letter your uncle had tried to hide from you. You could have gone home." "There was no home to go back to," Harry said. Which was accurate. The cupboard was not a home, and even if it had been, going back would have meant accepting a frame that had already been broken, and you can't unknow what you know. Lupin looked at him sidelong. "James would have liked who you are." It landed differently than similar things Lupin had said before, not as a comparison but as a statement about the present tense. Would have liked. Not "you're so like him" or "he would have been proud." Those phrases, Harry had noticed, were always slightly about the grief of the person saying them. This was about Harry specifically, as himself. "Tell me something he would have liked," Harry said. Lupin thought about it, genuinely, which was better than an immediate answer. "The directness," he said finally. "James couldn't stand people who talked around things. He'd have loved that you walk straight at it." A small, genuine smile at the edge of his mouth. "He'd also have been terrified of you. You're more organized than he was." "Mum's influence," Harry said. Lupin's smile became something fuller and a little fractured. Yes. Absolutely her influence. The summons came 20 minutes later. The panel was back. The Chief Justice, a heavy-set man named Ogden who had the face of someone who had been weighing things for so long it had become structural, read the finding in the flat, formal voice of someone who understood that the text was the thing and the performance of it was secondary. In the matter of Sirius Orion Black, case number 81 to 1101, this panel finds as follows. The original detainment of November 2, 1981 was conducted in violation of Wiesengemot Article 36 pertaining to the right to trial, as the wartime provision invoked by Director Bartemius Crouch Sr. had a scope limitation that precluded its application to cases without direct battlefield capture. The detainment was therefore illegal from the date of its execution. The gallery was very quiet. In the absence of a legal detainment order, the original charges, conspiracy in the murders of James and Lily Potter, and the murder of 13 Muggles, are hereby suspended pending formal re-examination. New evidence submitted to this panel, including the Gringotts forensic assessment and the sworn testimony of Remus John Lupin, establishes sufficient reasonable doubt to warrant full case dismissal absent the discovery of contradicting evidence of significant weight. He paused. This panel finds that Sirius Orion Black has been wrongfully detained for a period of 5 years, 10 months, and 13 days. He is to be released from Azkaban immediately. All charges are suspended. The matter of Peter Pettigrew's whereabouts and the question of his role in the events of October 31, 1981 remain open investigations. He looked up from the paper. Mr. Black. You are free. The gallery erupted. Not joyfully, not uniformly, it was the eruption of a large group of people all having very different reactions simultaneously, which sounded like an argument and a celebration and a political crisis all occupying the same space at once. Journalists were already writing. 2 Wiesengemot members were speaking rapidly at each other. Several people were crying without apparent embarrassment. Sirius had not moved from his chair. He sat very still on the floor of the chamber, flanked by the 2 Aurors who were now standing at a respectful distance rather than a guarding one, and he was looking at his own hands, and the expression on his face was one that Harry would not try to describe, because some things are private even when they happen in public. Harry made his way down to the floor level. The crowd parted slightly, not because anyone recognized him, or perhaps some of them did, he was starting to appear in newspapers, but because something in the way he moved suggested a direction that was not casual. He stopped in front of Sirius's chair. Sirius looked up. Up close he was worse and better than he'd appeared from the gallery. Worse because the toll of Azkaban was more visible from 2 feet away, the weight he'd lost, the quality his eyes had of something that had come very close to going dark permanently. Better because those eyes were, clearly and undeniably, still him. Whatever had been in Sirius Black before the worst years of his life, the part of it that was fundamental and essential, had survived. Harry didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say you're free now or everything is going to be fine. He wasn't his parents and he couldn't be and he didn't try. He said, I found a letter my dad sent you in the spring of 1981. It was in the sealed correspondence collection in the vault. I haven't opened it. I thought you should be there when I do. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. His throat moved. James wrote to me in the spring of 81, he said. His voice was rougher than Lupin's had been that first day, rougher in a way that had been worn into it rather than being natural. We argued about something. He stopped. I never wrote back. Then you definitely need to be there, Harry said. Sirius's face did several things. Then he stood, which was slower than it should have been for a man his age and more deliberate, and he was taller than Harry had expected, which was not a surprising thing about someone who'd been sitting down but was still the first properly physical thing about him, the reality of his actual size, his presence, which even stripped down and hollowed out had something in it that was, substantial. Real. There. Lupin appeared at Harry's side. He and Sirius looked at each other across a distance of about 6 feet,
and the look between them was one of those looks that happens between people who share a very long history and are simultaneously seeing each other for the first time in years and picking up the thread of something that was interrupted rather than ended. "Moony," Sirius said. "Padfoot," Lupin said, and his voice fractured cleanly on the single syllable, and he stepped forward, and Sirius moved, and the reunion was not graceful or cinematic. It was two people who had lost too much holding onto what hadn't been lost, which was enough. Harry looked at the chamber around them. Dumbledore was descending from the gallery, moving toward the floor with the measured, gracious movement of someone who intends to be present in this moment whether or not they are welcome in it. His expression was warm and relieved and carefully constructed. He caught Harry's eyes across the chamber. Harry held his gaze. He thought about October, the warning from the unsigned letter. They will try to use the black case to argue that the misconduct investigation is resolved. Harry turned to Fiara, who had materialized at his elbow at some point in the last few minutes. "Did Dumbledore's office file anything with the Wizengamot today?" Fiara had a small notebook open. "Supplementary character statement in support of Sirius Black's release," she said. "Filed this morning. Late enough to be included in the official record but too late for Bones to respond to it." "What does it say?" Fiara found the page. "It calls for the DMLE to consider today's ruling as a resolution of the events of October 1981, and for remaining ministry investigations to be refocused accordingly." There it was. Exactly as the letter had warned. The generosity of supporting Sirius's release, used as a lever to close the larger inquiry. The events of October 1981 have been addressed. Sirius Black is free. Let's move on. "File an objection," Harry said. "Through Gringotts. Today. Before the record closes." Fiara was already writing. Dumbledore arrived at the floor level. He looked at Harry with the expression he always had, warm, concerned, genuinely glad to see him. He looked at Sirius and Lupin, and his expression shifted to something more complex, more layered, that might have been genuine emotion and probably was, because that was the particular complication of Dumbledore. The genuine emotion and the calculated action were never separate things. "Sirius," he said, warmly. "I am so glad." Sirius looked at him. The look lasted about 2 seconds and was not warm, which was, Harry thought, an entirely reasonable position. "Albus," Sirius said flatly. And then he looked at Harry. "Can we go get that letter?" "Yes," Harry said. They left. Vault 687 was on the 3rd level, which meant the cart, which meant Sirius gripping the side with white knuckles and Lupin closing his eyes and Harry finding the whole thing genuinely enjoyable in the pure, uncomplicated way of someone for whom cart rides had not yet been ruined by context. The vault was large. Not grotesquely so, it was the vault of people who had been comfortable and careful rather than obscenely wealthy, but large enough that the space held things beyond the stacks of gold. Shelves along one wall held items Harry hadn't inventoried yet. A trunk in the corner. Several small boxes, labeled. The sealed correspondence collection was on a stand near the back, a flat leather portfolio with 2 sections, each sealed with a different charm. Harry's name was on both. He touched the portfolio and the seals read him and loosened. He'd told himself he'd open them alone, or with Lupin, and had been preparing to do exactly that for weeks. But Sirius was here, and Sirius was real, and the letter from James in the spring of 1981 was in one of these sections, and some things were more important than the plan he'd had before things changed. He opened the left section, his father's, and went through the letters carefully without reading them, just checking dates. There were 7. The spring of 1981 one was dated April 12th. He took it out and held it for a moment. "Do you want me to?" He started to offer it to Sirius. "Read it," Sirius said. He was standing a foot away. His voice was very even, which was the sound of someone who has decided they are going to be steady for this whether or not it costs them. Harry opened the letter and read it aloud. James's voice came through even in Harry's reading of it, the rhythm, the warmth, the thing that was underneath the warmth, that was always there in his father's words when the words were about something that mattered. Padfoot, I know we argued. I know it was bad. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks and I'm still not sure I was right, which should tell you something about how much I've changed since school, because I used to never admit that. We said things. I said things. I'm sorry for the ones that were unfair. But Sirius, I need you to hear this, whatever else, if something happens to us, you take Harry. Not Dumbledore, not the Ministry, not Petunia. You. He needs someone who actually knew us. Who will tell him the truth about us, the real version, the version where we were idiots sometimes and brilliant other times and loved each other very much. I trust Dumbledore. I do. But I trust you with my son in a way I don't trust anyone else, and I need you to know that's on record somewhere, even if it's just this letter. Even if it never matters. Write me back, you absolute disaster. James. Harry folded the letter. The vault was very quiet. Sirius was looking at the wall. The line of his jaw was rigid with the effort of whatever he was holding. Lupin had moved to stand at his shoulder, not touching him but close enough that the proximity itself was something. He wanted me to have you, Harry said, not to fill the silence but because it was true and true things were what you said when the false things had caused so much damage. Sirius looked at him. His eyes were very bright and not quite steady, and he said nothing for a long moment, and then he said, roughly, I would have come. If I hadn't been, I would have come for you immediately. I know, Harry said. I should have written back, Sirius said. That's the thing I was going to. I was angry and I was going to wait a week to let the anger settle before I wrote back, and then it was too late, Harry said. Then it was too late, Sirius said. Harry looked at him. This man who had lost everything on the same night his parents had, who had lost even more when Pettigrew had run and the system had closed around him without asking a single question. Who had spent nearly 6 years in the worst place in the world carrying the weight of a grief that was also a frame for a crime he hadn't committed. It's not too late now, Harry said. It was a simple thing. Not a cure, not a resolution, not a promise of easy ground ahead. Just a fact, they were here, Sirius was free, the letter existed, the vault existed, and Harry was not the same person who'd walked into Gringotts 3 months ago without knowing who loved him. Sirius looked at him for a long time. Then he did something that Harry would have found impossible to predict and which was, somehow, completely right. He crouched down to Harry's level, which put them face to face, and he looked at him with an expression that had stopped performing anything and was just, present. Real. His godfather's face. You look exactly like your dad, he said. But your eyes are lilies. 100%. That's what everyone says, Harry said. It's because it's true, Sirius said. And it means you got the best of both of them, which is, he stopped. Swallowed. That's good. That's really good, Harry. Harry held out his hand. Sirius looked at it. Then he took it, and his grip was firm in the way of someone who needed the physical fact of holding something real, and Harry gripped back with the full strength of a 7-year-old who understood exactly what this handshake was and was not performing any of it. Right, Harry said. We have work to do. Sirius let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Of course you do. He stood. He looked at Lupin. He's frightening. Constantly, Lupin agreed. He gets it from Lily. Entirely. Harry picked up the leather portfolio and started for the vault door, because they were right that it came from his mother, and his mother had also said don't spend it all on what's wrong, which was wisdom for after the gold, not during it. There would be time for everything that today had opened. Sirius would need time to become a person again, a whole one, which wasn't going to happen in a vault. Lupin would need time to let himself believe it. The investigation was still live. Pettigrew was still somewhere with someone's family. Dumbledore had just tried to use Sirius's freedom as a door to close. There was still everything to do.
But something essential had shifted today, the shape of the future had changed, and the change was towards something that contained people, real ones, who were his. He stepped out of the vault and back into the cold gold light of Gringotts. The cart was waiting. Chapter 5, Hogwarts opens its doors 4 years past, and Harry Potter did not waste a single one of them. He read everything. Not in the dutiful, box-ticking way of someone who has been told reading is important, but in the hungry, aggressive way of someone who understood that knowledge was the one resource no one could take from him without his consent. By the time he was 8 he had covered the full Hogwarts curriculum for the first 3 years in both theory and practical application, working through the textbooks with Lupin's guidance and then going beyond them because the textbooks had ends and Harry's interest in what was beyond them did not. Lupin was, it turned out, a genuinely extraordinary teacher. Not just because he knew the material, he knew it deeply enough to see the edges of it, the places where the standard explanation simplified too much and the real mechanism was stranger and more interesting than the version in the textbooks. He taught Harry to see those edges too, which was a different skill from simply learning facts, and a significantly more useful one. Sirius recovered. Not all at once, and not without difficulty, and not in a straight line. There were bad weeks when the Azkaban weight settled back onto him and the edges of his humor went dark and he was quiet in ways that were not peaceful. Harry and Lupin had learned, separately and without discussing it, to leave him space in those weeks rather than trying to talk him out of them, and to be clearly present so that the space didn't become isolation. He always came back. Each time a little more completely than the last. The legal case against Dumbledore ground forward in the slow, inexorable way of large institutional machines that have been given enough material to work with. Bones ran the investigation with her characteristic combination of thoroughness and stubbornness, and by the time Harry was 9 she had assembled a Wisengamot inquiry panel that was independent of Dumbledore's influence, a fact that had required considerable effort and several procedural battles that Harry tracked through Fiara's updates and which he found genuinely fascinating as a study in institutional politics. Dumbledore had been stripped of his administrative access to the Potter estate in the first month of the investigation and had never gotten it back. His positions, Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, Headmaster of Hogwarts, remained intact. The institutional structures were too entrenched, the goodwill too deep, the evidence still short of the threshold required for criminal charges versus the civil findings that had already been made. He remained the most powerful wizard in Britain. He remained the man who had cast 47 memory charms on a child and built an argument for why it had been necessary, and enough people believed the argument that the wall held. But it had cracks in it now, and everyone knew it. The Pettigrew question resolved itself in the winter of Harry's 9th year in a way that was almost anticlimactic after the months of searching. Lupin suggested Lead had been right, not the Weasleys specifically, but the investigative methodology had been right, and when the DMLE ran a survey of known wizarding families with abnormally old rat pets, they found 7 candidates, and the third one they investigated was a family in Devon with 5 red-haired children, a father who worked at the ministry, and a rat named Scabbers who was, according to the youngest daughter, 11 years old and showing no signs of dying. The DMLE team sent to investigate brought a specialized animagus detection charm, which Pettigrew apparently sensed because he bolted before they could fully execute it, transforming mid-run and disappearing through a gap in the garden wall. They'd seen him. They had 3 witnesses, 2 ministry officials and the eldest Weasley boy, who'd looked at the retreating rat and said, with the particular certainty of someone who had just processed something very strange, he had a finger missing. A ministry-wide search was issued. The rat was not found immediately. But the sighting was documented, witnessed, filed, and official. Peter Pettigrew was alive. Sirius Black had been framed. The record was complete. Harry heard this news on a Tuesday evening and noted it with satisfaction and then went back to what he'd been doing, which was working through advanced transfiguration theory with a focus on the mechanics of partial transformation, because the Hogwarts letter was arriving in 8 months and he intended to be ready for things Hogwarts hadn't prepared for. Sirius, when told, went quiet for a long time and then said, "I want to find him myself," in a tone that was perfectly controlled and very clearly meant what it said. "Bones will find him," Harry said. "The ministry has resources you don't." I have motivation they don't, Sirius said. You have legal standing now, Harry said. Don't compromise it. Sirius looked at him with the particular expression he developed for moments when Harry said something that was obviously right and simultaneously annoying. You're 11, he said. I know, Harry said. Let Bones do it. Sirius let Bones do it. He didn't enjoy it, but he did it, and this was a kind of progress. The Hogwarts letter arrived on July 31st, Harry's 11th birthday. He was eating breakfast with Sirius and Lupin, a birthday breakfast that Sirius had made with great enthusiasm and moderate technical success. The eggs were fine, the bacon was excellent, and something had been attempted with pastry that had not gone according to plan but was still recognizably food, when the owl came through the window with the familiar weight of official mail and the particular Hogwarts seal that Harry had been reading on textbooks for 4 years. He opened it before Sirius could. The usual standard text, which he already knew by heart from looking at the copies in the school's own published materials. He read it anyway. He held it for a moment. It was different, having it. He hadn't expected it to feel different from knowing it was coming, and it did, in the specific way that real things are always slightly different from their anticipation, more solid, more final, more real. Well? Sirius said. Harry set the letter down and picked up the supply list. He looked at it carefully. Most of it he already had. There were a few items, the official first-year version of certain standard texts, a new cauldron, that were formalities, because the editions he'd been working from were sometimes older or more advanced than what the list specified and he'd need the official versions for class purposes. I need a cauldron, he said. Sirius stared at him. That's your response to your Hogwarts letter. I already have most of the books, Harry said. I need a cauldron and a new set of standard robes because the ones from last year are too short now. He looked up from the list. Also an owl. I want an owl. Sirius sat back in his chair and looked at Lupin. Did we break him somehow? Lupin was smiling into his tea. He's been ready for this since he was 9. Give him the morning to absorb it. I've absorbed it, Harry said. It's good. I'm glad. He set the list down and looked at Sirius properly. I'm very glad. I've wanted to go since I understood what it was. I already know it's going to be real. I don't need to perform surprise. Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then he stood up, came around the table, and did what he'd been doing increasingly often over the past 2 years, which was put his hand on the top of Harry's head in the unceremonious, affectionate way of someone who had decided that physical gestures of this sort were within the scope of what they were to each other. Harry had the first time been briefly startled and subsequently decided this was fine and actually good. Happy birthday, pup, Sirius said. Don't call me pup, Harry said. Absolutely not stopping. Diagon Alley on the 1st of September's shopping run was an education in its own right. Not the shops, he knew those well enough by now, had been coming to the alley since he was 7. The education was in how other families operated, which he observed with the detached interest of someone who had been studying the wizarding world from textbooks and was now watching the primary sources. Children his age with parents who were explaining things to them that the children already clearly knew but were enduring the explanations of because they loved their parents or were patient or both. Children who didn't know what they were walking into and were visibly overwhelmed by the reality of the alley after years of hearing about it. Children who were performing excitement for the benefit of adults who needed to see it. He got the cauldron. He got the robes. He found a snowy owl in Elops that looked at him with the assessing, mutual attention of someone who was also deciding, and he looked back, and she blinked once, and he bought her and named her Hedwig after a medieval sorceress he'd encountered in one of the history books, because the name had the quality of something earned rather than assigned. The bookshop was a study in controlled decision-making. He bought the standard texts because they were on the list. He did not buy the additional things he'd already identified because he'd be ordering those from a specialist supplier in Edinburgh that Lupin had introduced him to, whose selection was broader and whose editions were better. He was in and out of Flourish and Blots in 12 minutes. Sirius bought him an ice cream on the way back, which Harry ate while reading the first chapter of the Standard Book of Spells, grade 1, not because he needed to read it but because he was curious how they framed the fundamentals for beginners, and the framing was interesting, and the ice cream was good. Lupin watched this with a fondness he'd stopped trying to hide sometime around Harry's 9th birthday. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," Harry said, turning a page. "Nervous?" Harry considered this honestly. "About Dumbledore," he said. "Not about the school." "He won't do anything to you directly," Lupin said. "Not now. Not with the investigation live and Bones watching." "I know," Harry said. "That's not what I'm thinking about." He closed the book. "I'm thinking about the students. What they know about me, what they've been told. The version of me that's been circulating for 4 years." He paused. "Some of them will have decided who I am before I get there." "And you can't control that," Lupin said. "I can control what I do when I get there," Harry said. "Which is enough." Sirius licked his ice cream cone and said, "For what it's worth, I was terrified on my first day. I was 11 and I was a black, which everyone had opinions about, and I had no idea which way I was going to land and neither did anyone else." He looked at Harry. "Best thing I ever did was stop worrying about what people thought and just be exactly who I was. Sorted me in about 30 seconds. "You were a Gryffindor in 30 seconds, Lupin said. "Some of us took longer. Some of us wore the hat for almost 4 minutes, Sirius agreed. Some of us were a very complicated case. Some of us, Lupin said precisely, were simply thoughtful." Harry watched the two of them with a warmth in his chest that he had stopped being surprised by but never stopped noticing. This was what they were, not a traditional family, nothing like a standard configuration, but something that had been assembled out of people who had needed each other and had figured out how to be needed in return. He finished the ice cream. He went home. He packed his trunk. King's Cross on the 1st of September was exactly as chaotic as everything he'd read about it, which made it simultaneously familiar and new in the way of things you've prepared for that still managed to surprise you in their specifics. Platform 9 3/4 was through the barrier, which Harry took at a confident walk rather than a run, because running suggested uncertainty about whether it would work, and he didn't have any. He came through the steam and noise and a scarlet engine that was exactly as red as it should be, and the platform full of people in the specific controlled chaos of departure. Sirius and Lupin came through behind him. Lupin with the measured calm of someone returning to a place he'd been before, Sirius with the wide-eyed, slightly raw quality of someone for whom this platform carried the weight of a very particular memory. He stood for a moment after coming through the barrier and looked at the train and said nothing, and Harry didn't rush him. "Last time I was here," Sirius said, "James threw a dung bomb at Snape's trunk from the window." "Did it work?" Harry asked. "Spectacular success," Sirius said. "We were banned from the sweets trolley for a month." He shook himself slightly, like a dog settling its coat. "Right. Go be brilliant. Try not to terrify everyone on day 1. "No promises," Harry said. Lupin pulled him briefly into a hug that had the same unself-conscious quality as Sirius's head touching, something that had become normal through repetition and was the better for it. "Right," he said. "Not every day. But right." "I will," Harry said. He picked up his trunk. He looked at both of them. He did not feel like crying, which would have been understandable. He felt like himself, grounded in the specific, present-tense reality of who he was, which was a person who had been built by everything that had happened since a Tuesday in June 4 years ago and who was about to walk onto a train that would take him to a school that was the next part of everything. He boarded the train. He found a compartment near the front and settled into it with Hedwig's cage and his bag and the second volume of the Advanced Transfiguration text, which was not a textbook but a theoretical treatise that he'd been working through for 3 weeks. He was 40 pages in when the compartment door opened and a red-haired boy looked in with the cautious hopefulness of someone checking whether they were welcome. "Is it all right if the boy started. "Yes," Harry said, and moved his bag off the other seat. The boy sat down with the slightly relieved energy of someone who'd been checking several compartments. He had freckles and a patched robe and a smear of something on his chin that was probably breakfast, and he looked at Harry with the frank curiosity of someone who had not yet decided to be careful about making it obvious. "I'm Ron," he said. "Ron Weasley." The name landed with a weight that Ron clearly didn't know it had. Harry registered it, filed what it meant, the family from Devon, the family with the rat, and said, "Harry Potter," and watched Ron's face do the thing that faces did when he told people his name, which was go through several quick adjustments. "Oh," Ron said. "Then, right. I mean, I knew you'd be here, obviously, everyone's been talking about," he stopped. "Sorry. That came out weird." "It's fine," Harry said. He looked at Ron with genuine interest, because Ron Weasley had seen Pettigrew flee and had described the missing finger without prompting, which meant his family's evidence had helped close the case on Sirius, which was not nothing. "Your family was in Devon," Harry said. "You had a rat named Scabbers." Ron blinked. "How did you?" Then his expression shifted into something more interesting, recognition mixed with a kind of relief. "You're the one who started the whole investigation," he said. "My mum told me." "She didn't say who, she said someone had opened the whole Sirius Black case back up and it turned out our rat was," he stopped, looking slightly horrified. "Our rat was a person. That's still really horrible." "I know," Harry said. "Fred and George want him for experiments," Ron said grimly. "They're calling it justice." Harry looked at him. Ron looked back. They were both 11 and sitting on a train going toward the same place and had been, without either of them knowing it, adjacent parts of the same event for 2 years. "Your evidence helped free my godfather," Harry said. "I didn't get to thank your family at the time. So thank you." Ron went slightly pink in the way of someone who doesn't know what to do with genuine gratitude but is clearly glad to have it. "I just told the Aurors what I saw," he said. "Anyone would've." "Not everyone did," Harry said. They looked at each other, and something settled between them that had the quality of things that are simple when they happen, no ceremony, no negotiation, just two people deciding in the same moment that they were going to be friends. Ron reached into his bag. "Do you want a chocolate frog? My mum made sandwiches but she always packs chocolate frogs too, there are loads." "Yes," Harry said. They were joined an hour into the journey by a girl who opened the compartment door with a purpose that suggested she was looking for something specific. She had wild brown hair and sharp eyes and a book under her arm that Harry recognized as Hogwarts, a history in the revised 1984 edition. She looked at both of them with the assessing look of someone taking rapid inventory. "I'm looking for a toad," she said. "Neville Longbottom's, he's a few compartments back, he's very upset." "Have you seen one?" "No," Ron said. "No," Harry said. "What does it look like?" The girl looked at him slightly impatiently. "It's a toad. They look like toads." She paused. She looked at Harry's book. "That's not a first-year text," she said. "No," Harry said. "Are you Harry Potter?" she said. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said, with the crisp confidence of someone who has decided their own name is worth delivering properly. "I've read about what happened at the Ministry. The Gringotts case and the memory charms." She said it with the directness of someone who has strong opinions about things she considers important and has made the calculation that social delicacy is less important than getting to the point. It was extraordinary. The legal argument about the emancipation petition was particularly interesting. Harry looked at her. "You read the legal filings?" "They were in the profit summary. I read everything I could find." She said this without apology, as a plain statement of fact. "I also read all the published material on resonance echo magic. It's incredibly rare. Your parents' magical ability must have been exceptional." "It was," Harry said. She looked at him, recalibrating slightly. He'd given her a direct answer about his parents, which was apparently not what she'd expected, and she adjusted to it with the speed of someone whose mental model was good at incorporating new data. "I'll help look for the toad if you want to come," she said, to both of them. "More people covering the train is more efficient." "Sure," Ron said, standing with the easy sociability of someone who had grown up in a large family and found other people's company the natural state of things. Harry marked his page and stood up. The toad, Trevor, belonging to a round-faced boy named Neville Longbottom who looked relieved to the point of tears when they returned it, and who was clearly someone for whom the first day of everything was more terrifying than clarifying, was found in the corridor outside a sixth-year compartment, sitting in a pool of afternoon light with the serene immobility of something that has never once been in a hurry. Neville said, "Thank you," he always does this, with a weary fondness that suggested this was true. "He'll settle in when he has a proper place," Hermione said, in the practical tone of someone who has looked this up. Toads feel more secure in familiar environments. Neville looked at her with the expression of someone who has been given information that is simultaneously useful and something he will have to implement. "Right," he said. "Yes." He clutched Trevor more securely. He looked at Harry. "Are you?" He stopped. "Sorry. You're Harry Potter." "Yes," Harry said. He'd said this 5 times today and it was going to get more frequent before it got less frequent, which was a fact to be adapted to. Neville nodded solemnly. "My parents," he said, quietly, they knew your parents. From the Order." He said it simply, as information offered, not as a bid for sympathy. "I'm Neville." Harry looked at him. He thought about what he knew of the Longbottom family, the file that mentioned them, the history. He thought about the weight in Neville's voice that was the specific weight of someone who has grown up around a grief they were never quite inside of. "I know who your parents are," Harry said. "I'm sorry about what happened to them." Neville looked at him. Whatever he saw in Harry's face, the plain honesty of it, not performed, not careful, made something in his own face loosen slightly. "Thank you," he said. "Most people don't say it like that. They usually say it like they're apologizing for something awkward." "It's not awkward," Harry said. "It's just true." Neville nodded. They stood in the corridor for a moment, 4 of them, in the afternoon light of a train going north, and the train curved slightly and the hills outside the window were the deep green of Scottish September, and Harry thought, this is what it starts. Hogwarts appeared out of the gathering dusk like something that had decided to become real from an idea. Harry had seen pictures, had read descriptions, had built a model of it in his head from the combined material of 4 years of study, and none of it quite accounted for the actual thing, the sheer vertical presence of it, the way it sat in its landscape as if the landscape had grown up around it rather than the other way around, the lights in the windows that were too alive to be electric, too warm to be cold, too permanent to be temporary. He sat in the boat next to Ron with Hedwig's cage between his feet and felt the castle pulling at something in him that wasn't entirely explicable by topography or architecture. Magic recognized magic, was the theory. Old magic recognized new magic and assessed it and found what resonated. The castle was very old and whatever it found in Harry apparently resonated, because something in his chest did a thing like a tuning fork struck against the right pitch. Ron whispered, mental, in the reverent tone of someone saying beautiful in a different register. Yes, Harry agreed. The boats docked. They went in through the side entrance, gathered in the entrance hall under the gaze of a magnificent staircase, and were met by Professor McGonagall, who was exactly as Harry had imagined her, tartan robes, squared posture, a face that was simultaneously strict and fair in a ratio that shifted slightly toward fair if you knew what to look for. She gave the standard address about houses and floating ghosts and the enchanted ceiling with the manner of someone who gives this speech annually and takes it seriously every time, which Harry respected. Then McGonagall looked across the assembled first years and found him, and her gaze stopped on him for a fraction of a second longer than on the others, and something in her face was not surprise, she'd known he was coming, but was the specific expression of someone seeing something they'd been told about and confirming that the description was accurate. She moved on without comment. The great hall was overwhelming in the way that things are overwhelming when they are exactly as described and then somehow more. The ceiling was the Scottish night sky, stars emerging from the navy blue of early dark, and the candlelight was warm and the tables were full of people and sound and the accumulated energy of a place where things had happened for centuries. Harry walked in and looked at all of it and thought, yes. The sorting was alphabetical, which meant Ron was almost last and Harry was in the middle of the list. He watched the others go up, watched the hat work, which was genuinely fascinating as a piece of living magical artifice, an object that had been thinking and deciding for 1,000 years. He thought about what it would find in him, what it would do with what it found. His name was called. He walked to the stool. He sat. The hat was placed on his head. The hat was something he hadn't been able to prepare for properly, the internal quality of it, the specific sensation of something very old and very intelligent addressing you from inside your own mind, which was both intimate and impersonal in a way that was unlike anything else. It was not threatening. It was simply thorough. Well, it said, with the inward voice of something that has been doing this for a very long time. You're interesting. Harry waited. Courage, certainly. Exceptional courage, not the performed kind, the structural kind, the kind that runs through everything. Intelligence well above the norm. Ambition, though not of the kind most people recognize as ambition, it's not about position, it's about impact. You want to change things. Specific things. And under all of it, and this is what makes you interesting, loyalty. Not to institutions. Not to hierarchies. To people. To truth. You do well in Slytherin. Strategically, certainly. The ambition and the intelligence would be well served there. But Slytherin works through careful concealment, and you don't conceal. Ravenclaw could house you. The intellectual drive is exceptional. But Gryffindor, the hat said, with something like certainty, is where you were always going. Gryffindor, it shouted, to the hall. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry stood, removed the hat, and walked to the table with his hands in his pockets and his face composed and his heart doing something slightly undignified that he was content to let it do privately. He sat down, and people around him were saying things, and a red-haired girl several seats down, who turned out to be a third-year named Ginny who had apparently been following the legal case in the Prophet with great enthusiasm, pressed a plate of food toward him with the energy of someone who has decided he needed feeding, which he accepted because he did. He looked up at the staff table. Dumbledore was watching him. Of course he was. He sat in the center of the staff table with the benign authority of a headmaster at his school, and his expression was warm and watchful, and his eyes behind the half-moon spectacles were doing that careful, penetrating thing they did when he was assessing rather than just observing. Harry met his gaze steadily, ate a piece of chicken, and looked away first only because Flitwick, 2 seats down the staff table from Dumbledore, had caught his eye and given him a very small, very precise nod, and that seemed like the more interesting acknowledgement to return. The thing about Hogwarts was that it was, despite everything, genuinely wonderful. He hadn't let himself be fully certain of this before arriving, he was too practical for sentimentality about things he hadn't experienced, but the wonder of it was not the performed, gasping kind that other people sometimes accused him of missing. It was the real kind. The kind where you round a corner and find a corridor that shifts, or look up at the astronomy tower and feel the specific cold clarity of high-altitude starlight, or walk into the library for the first time and smell centuries of paper and magic and accumulated thinking. The castle was alive in a way that wasn't metaphorical. He discovered this properly in the second week, when a staircase moved under his feet not randomly but with what appeared to be intention, depositing him not at the dead end he'd have reached on the planned route but at a shorter path to the library that he hadn't known existed. He stood at the new junction for a moment and looked at the architecture around him and thought, you did that on purpose. The castle didn't respond in language. But something in the quality of the ambient magic was different from passive and that was enough. Classes were, well. His professors were not prepared for him, which was not their fault but was still occasionally frustrating. Transfiguration was the clearest example. McGonagall had them attempting to turn matchsticks into needles, which was the standard first introduction to object-to-object transformation,
and Harry did it in approximately 4 seconds and then sat there while everyone else worked and had to actively avoid finishing the supplementary exercises she hadn't assigned yet. McGonagall looked at his needle. She looked at him. She held the needle up to the light. It was perfect, better than perfect. It had the slight tapering at the tip that indicated the caster had thought about the physical properties of the target object rather than just the shape. She set it down. "Do the next 3 matchsticks," she said, in her measured way, "and then take out your own materials. Whatever you're working on." He took out the Advanced Transfiguration Treatise. She glanced at the title and something moved through her expression, recognition and recalibration. She moved on to the next student. After class she said, quietly, as he was leaving, "See me Thursday afternoon, Mr. Potter. I'd like to understand your preparation level properly before I know how to challenge you." "Yes, Professor," he said. She was looking at him with the look she'd given him at the sorting, the look of confirmation. He looked back with the frank, direct look that was his default, and something in her expression shifted slightly, became less about assessment and more about something that was also, possibly, a kind of respect. Thursday afternoon established that Harry was somewhere between 5th and 6th year level in Transfiguration theory and 4th year in Transfiguration practice, the gap being that his physical wand technique was self-taught and had some inefficiencies that formal instruction would correct. McGonagall was honest about this, and he was grateful for that honesty, and she set him a specific practice regime and a parallel reading list that included material she said she hadn't assigned to a first year in 20 years. He thanked her. He meant it. Charms was Flitwick, who turned out to be exactly what Ragnarok had described, a small man with a large mind who taught as if the subject were genuinely exciting because he genuinely found it exciting, which was the most compelling quality a teacher could have. He didn't make a production of Harry in class, which Harry appreciated. He was simply rigorous, demanding, and interesting, and he taught as if everyone in the room was capable of understanding deeply if they worked for it. After the first class, when the others were filing out, Flitwick said, "One moment, Mr. Potter," in a tone that was conversational rather than formal. Harry stayed. Flitwick waited until the last student was gone. Then he looked at Harry over the desk with those precise, intelligent eyes and said, "Ragnarok spoke highly of you. That is not something he does often or lightly." "He was generous," Harry said. "He was accurate," Flitwick said. "Which is different." He folded his small hands on the desk. "I want you to know that in my class you will be treated exactly as every other student. Not because I don't recognize what you can do, but because being treated exactly as every other student while being capable of significantly more is its own education." A pause. "However, I have a standing arrangement with several students who wish to explore material beyond the standard curriculum, and more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now." Chapter 6, The Stone and the Man Behind It. The standing arrangement Flitwick offered turned out to be an informal Tuesday evening session in his office, with 3 other students who had outpaced the standard curriculum in different ways. Harry showed up the first Tuesday and found a 7th-year Ravenclaw named Clearwater who was working on theoretical wandless casting, a 5th-year Hufflepuff named Abbott who was doing something complex with layered charms that Harry didn't fully understand yet and found interesting precisely because of that, and a 4th-year Gryffindor named Chambers who was mostly there, Harry eventually concluded, because Flitwick's office had the best biscuits in the castle. He didn't mind any of them. The sessions were useful in the specific way of things that push you sideways rather than forward, not covering ground you haven't covered but forcing you to think about the ground you have covered from an angle you hadn't tried. Flitwick was a precise and efficient teacher in class and a completely different kind of teacher in his office, more interested in questions than answers, more interested in the why beneath the mechanics than the mechanics themselves. Harry liked him considerably. The rest of the first term settled into its shape quickly. Ron was his roommate and primary company in the Gryffindor common room, and their friendship had the easy, uncomplicated quality of things that don't require maintenance because they're structurally sound. Ron was funny and direct and had a strategic mind that showed up most clearly in chess, which he played with the instinctive confidence of someone who'd been doing it since before he could reliably read, and which Harry lost to comprehensively the first time they played and then began to study with the focused attention he applied to everything,
until by December he was losing by smaller margins. Hermione was different from Ron in almost every way and complementary to both of them in a way Harry found genuinely useful. She operated by accumulation. She needed to know all of it, every detail, every cross-reference, before she felt secure in a conclusion. Harry operated by extraction. He found the load-bearing element and worked outward from there. The friction between these two approaches produced better thinking than either alone, which was the best argument for any kind of collaboration. Neville Longbottom quietly became a fixture. He had no natural confidence in his magic, which was a product of years of being told by his grandmother and others that he didn't live up to his parents' legacy, and the gap between what he could do and what he believed he could do was significant. Harry noticed this the way he noticed things, thoroughly, without making a production of it, and began, in a casual, unpressured way, to treat Neville as someone whose contributions were expected and worth having. Not effusively. Just as a plain fact. It worked, slowly, which was how things that were actually good for people tended to work. Dumbledore was a constant, low-frequency presence in the background of everything. Harry saw him at meals, at the occasional school-wide events, and once in a corridor in the second week where they passed each other and Dumbledore said, "Settling in well, I hope," with that warm, attentive manner, and Harry said, "Very well, thank you," and kept walking. The investigation Bones was running had produced 2 civil findings by November, the estate mismanagement finding and the guardianship neglect finding, both formalized and entered into the Wisengamot record. They didn't reach the criminal threshold, which was a higher bar that required evidence of deliberate malicious intent rather than the kind of willful blindness and authoritarian overreach that characterized what Dumbledore had actually done. Bones had told Harry in a letter in October that this was the likely limit of what the civil process could achieve in the current political climate. Dumbledore remained in his positions. Harry had written back, "I understand. Keep the record clean and complete. The political climate changes." Bones had not responded to this, but Fiara had told him she'd mentioned it, and the investigation had not been closed. The thing about Hogwarts that Harry hadn't fully anticipated was Quirrell. He'd read about Quirrell in the staff listings: Defense Against the Dark Arts, appointment in 1991, prior academic post at some minor institution, known for a nervous disposition and an unfortunate habit of stuttering when anxious. The turban. The smell of garlic. The general aura of someone who seemed to be always slightly frightened of something he wouldn't name. What the staff listings hadn't included was what Harry noticed in the first class, which was that Quirrell's nervousness had a specific texture to it, a direction. It wasn't general anxiety. It was the anxiety of someone who was managing something that required constant attention and was afraid that at any moment the management would slip. He had the warmth of his ambient magical sense, not a formal skill yet, something he'd been developing and hadn't named, and Quirrell's magical signature had a quality he hadn't encountered before. A duality. 2 things where there should be one. He mentioned this to no one immediately. He noted it, filed it, and started paying closer attention. By October he was certain. By November he had a theory. By December, when the whispers about the third-floor corridor had settled into the general atmosphere of the school like weather, the theory had become a conclusion. Something was on the 3rd floor. Quirrell knew what it was. Quirrell had a second presence in his magical signature that was consistent with. Harry had read this in 2 separate volumes, once in a dark arts compendium Lupin had given him with appropriate contextual warnings and once in a theoretical piece on soulcraft from the restricted section that he'd borrowed through Flitwick's recommendation, a soul fragment. A piece of someone else's consciousness attached to a living host, surviving through proximity and borrowed life. Lord Voldemort was not dead. He was in this building, wearing Quirrell's back, and whatever was on the 3rd floor was the reason. Harry spent a Thursday evening in Flitwick's office not engaging with the session at all, which Flitwick noticed and didn't press, and on the walk back to the tower he stopped at a corridor junction and thought through everything he knew. The Philosopher's Stone. That was the obvious conclusion from the security setup he'd been able to observe by the 3rd week of term. The 3-headed dog had been visible for exactly 4 seconds through an inadvertently opened door before Harry had quietly pulled it shut, which was 4 seconds of significant magical assessment.
A creature of that specific configuration guarding something in a school known to house items of rare magical value. The stone had been moved from Gringotts in the summer before term. Ragnarok had mentioned it obliquely in a letter that hadn't said the words Philosopher's Stone but had said enough that Harry, reading it, had filled in the rest. Nicholas Flamel's stone. The source of immortality. The thing Voldemort, in whatever diminished form he currently occupied, would want more than anything. Harry thought about what Dumbledore would do with this information if given it. Dumbledore knew the stone was here, he'd put it here, presumably, under precisely this security setup. He either knew Voldemort was in the school or suspected it and was using the stone as bait. Either way, the intended outcome was a confrontation that had probably been planned to end a specific way, and the specific way was very likely to involve Harry, because Harry was the one in the prophecy and Dumbledore was someone who paid attention to prophecies with the devotion of a man who had built his life around one. He thought about what his mother had said, the reasons are always very good. You have to look very hard at the frame around the reason. The frame around this setup was, a dangerous artifact is in the school, a dark wizard is hunting it, and a specific child is at Hogwarts for the first time in exactly this year. Coincidences of this quality were not coincidences. He didn't tell Dumbledore. He told Hermione. She was in the library when he found her, where she usually was after dinner, and he sat down across from her and said, quietly, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not have the reaction where you want to go to a professor immediately. She looked at him over the top of her book. That's a concerning opening. I know. He told her everything. Not quickly, he went through the reasoning in full, the magical signature observation, the stone analysis, the Quirrell conclusion, all of it. He watched her face as he talked, which went through several distinct phases, initial skepticism, which was appropriate, active engagement as the argument built, and by the end something that was not quite alarm but was the functional neighbor of it, the expression of someone who has followed a line of reasoning to its end and found the end to be correct and significant. Voldemort, she said, very quietly. In this building. In Quirrell's building, Harry said. That's, she stopped. Started again. Harry, that's not something we can just, this is life and death. This is extremely dangerous. We need to tell someone who can actually, who, he said. Not combatively. As a genuine question. She opened her mouth. Closed it. She was, he knew, running through the options in the same methodical way she ran through everything. Dumbledore, who had arranged this deliberately and whose agenda Harry did not trust. McGonagall, who was Dumbledore's deputy and who, in a matter of school security involving this level of dark magic, would go to Dumbledore. Flitwick, who would also have to escalate. Bones, who was at the Ministry and who had no jurisdiction within Hogwarts. Right, Hermione said. She was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I'm going to find out what the security setup on the third floor is, Harry said. All of it. Not just the dog. Everything. If I know what's between here and the stone, I know what Quirrell's going to have to go through to get there, and I know how much time we have. You want to map the defenses. I want to know what Dumbledore built and what it tells me about what he's expecting to happen. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. She had a particular expression she wore when she was deciding whether to argue, and this was not that expression. This was the other one, the one where she'd assessed the situation and concluded that the person across from her had thought it through more thoroughly than she had and was probably right. I'm coming with you, she said. I was going to ask, Harry said. They brought Ron and Neville. Not because Harry had planned to expand the group, but because Ron was in a common room when they came back and read Harry's face with the ease of 3 months' friendship and said, "What's happening?" in a tone that was not rhetorical, and Neville was next to him and looked up from his herbology essay with the particular attention of someone who has learned to notice when things have shifted. Harry told them both. Ron's face did several things, the last of which was a kind of settling into seriousness that Harry had seen before when they played chess, the look of someone who had decided they were engaged and were now thinking about it properly. "When do we go?" he said. "Not tonight," Harry said.
We plan first. Neville said, I want to help, with the quiet firmness of someone who has made a decision and knows it's right and is not going to be argued out of it. I know it's dangerous. I want to help anyway. Harry looked at him. He thought about the gap between what Neville could do and what Neville believed he could do, and how that gap was already narrowing, and how the best thing you could do for someone with that gap was give them the chance to close it. Good, he said. We'll need you. They went down in the second week of December, on a night that was cold enough that the castle's ambient warmth felt like a specific gift, and dark enough that the corridors on the third floor had the hushed, suspended quality of somewhere that has been deliberately left alone. Harry had spent 2 weeks preparing. Not frantically, with the focused, methodical pace that was his natural mode. He had Hermione's research on flannel, which was thorough and included several technical papers on the stone's properties that she'd found in the library's restricted section through a combination of legitimate access and creative interpretation of Flitwick signed permissions. He had Lupin's letters, one of which had, in response to a carefully phrased question, included what Lupin knew about magical trap-setting methodology from his Order years, without asking why Harry was asking, which was one of the things Harry valued most about him. He had his own preparations, specific spells for specific expected scenarios, practiced until the execution was automatic. Ron had worked out the chess problem on the 7th floor, which was the level of strategic thinking the final defense apparently required, and had done so in under an hour with Hermione looking over his shoulder and occasionally suggesting things he declined to use because his read on the board was different and turned out to be correct. Neville had contributed something that none of them had thought of, which was the herbological component, a plant-based defense that required identifying and neutralizing Devil's Snare, which Neville knew from the herbology reading he'd been doing obsessively for months and which turned out to be exactly applicable. The look on his face when Harry said that's exactly what we need, how do you do it? Was one Harry suspected he'd remember. They got past the dog, Hagrid's dog, as it turned out, the door above the trap door being unmistakably Hagrid adjacent in its construction, with a spell that replicated the flute note the dog needed to sleep, which Hermione had found in a book on magical creature management. The dog went down without drama. The snare was Neville's without question. He moved through the problem with the decisiveness of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and why, and on the other side of it he was breathing faster and his face was flushed and there was an expression on it that Harry wanted to fix permanently into the record, because it was the expression of someone who had just surprised themselves. The flying keys were chaos and then were not, because Ron watched the pattern for 45 seconds and said, "Third shelf, third from the left, it's mimicking the others but the wing is different," with the quiet certainty of someone reading a board, and Harry went up and got it in one pass. The chess was Ron's entirely. He looked at the board for a long time and then began making moves in the particular state of focused quiet that was Ron at his most himself, not showy, not narrating, just thinking, and acting on the thinking, and it was over in 12 moves. Then they were through. The room on the other side of the chess problem was not another obstacle. It was a corridor, short, with a door at the end, and a smell that Harry recognized from his reading, a particular quality of old magic and something else, something that had a faint wrongness to it, not in the smell of decay exactly but in the smell of something that was alive in a way it shouldn't be. He stopped the others. "Wait here," he said. "I need to go in alone." "Absolutely not," Hermione said immediately. "If Voldemort is in there, if he's active, if Quirrell has moved already, I don't want all of us in the room." He looked at each of them. "I'm not being a hero. I'm being practical. One person moving fast is harder to stop than 4 people moving together." He looked at Ron. "If I'm not out in 10 minutes, you go to Flitwick." "Not Dumbledore." "Flitwick." Ron looked at him for a long moment. 6 minutes, he said. 8, Harry said. 7, Ron said, with the tone of someone who has decided this is the negotiation. "Fine," Harry said. He opened the door. Quirrell was standing in front of the mirror of Eriste. The room was large and candlelit and dominated by the mirror, which stood against the far wall in its ornate frame, and Quirrell was in front of it with his back to the door, his reflection showing him reaching forward, and the stone, Harry could feel it,
the specific dense warmth of an artifact of that power, was not yet in his hands. Which meant it was in the mirror's logic, waiting for someone who wanted it without wanting to use it. Harry stepped inside. Quirrell turned. His face was pale and taut and his eyes had the specific quality Harry had been watching all year, the managed, ongoing effort of someone maintaining something difficult, and behind that quality, in the expression, was something that was not quite Quirrell. The second presence Harry had been tracking for months, closer to the surface now, more active. The turban was in place. "Potter," Quirrell said. His stutter was gone entirely, which told Harry everything about who was in charge of his voice right now. "Professor," Harry said. "You're a remarkable child," Quirrell said, with the precise, evaluating quality of someone else's observation delivered through someone else's mouth. "To have gotten this far alone." "Not alone," Harry said. "But I came in here alone, yes." "Clever." Something in Quirrell's posture shifted, the inhabiting presence taking more direct control, and Harry felt it in the room's magical atmosphere, a pressure change, like weather arriving. "The stone. You'll help me get it." "No," Harry said. Pleasantly. As a plain statement of fact. The pressure increased. Quirrell's face moved into something colder, more deliberate. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. Lord Voldemort in Quirrell's body, wanting Flamel's stone to restore his physical form," Harry said. "I understand it well enough." He kept his eyes on Quirrell and let his peripheral awareness track the room, the mirror, the door, the specific texture of the magic Voldemort was gathering. "I also understand that you've been weakening all year. Whatever's keeping you in there, it's not sustainable. That's why tonight." A pause. The cold quality in the room intensified. "Impressive," the voice said, speaking more directly now, using Quirrell's mouth as an instrument rather than a residence. "Your parents were intelligent, too. It's in the blood." "My parents were intelligent enough not to trust you," Harry said. "Or anyone who trusted you." "Your parents died," the voice said, simply. "The intelligence was insufficient. They died because someone told them to hide and chose their secret keeper badly," Harry said. "They died because the people who were supposed to protect them made decisions for them." He looked at the mirror. "You were a piece of that. You weren't even the whole of it." Something shifted. The voice was very still for a moment. "You blame Dumbledore," it said. "I blame everyone who deserves it," Harry said. "Which includes you. It just doesn't include only you." He was moving while he spoke, not obviously, but the same way he moved in chess problems, not toward the obvious goal but toward the position that controlled the game. The mirror's logic required someone who wanted the stone without wanting to use it for personal gain. He understood this mechanism. He understood what he needed to do. "You can't stop me," the voice said. "You're 11 years old. You have no wand drawn, no shield cast, no ally present. Even with your ability, I don't need to stop you with force," Harry said. He stepped in front of the mirror. He looked into it. He did not see what most people saw in the mirror of Eriste. The mirror showed the viewer their deepest desire, and the standard assumption was that the deepest desire was something obvious, something personal and self-interested. His mother's face. His father alive. The family he hadn't had. What Harry saw was himself, and the room around him as it was, and the people behind the door who were waiting, and the people in the world outside who were working towards something real, and a future that was not fixed and not owed to him and was worth working for. Not a fantasy. Not a dream. The actual shape of what he was moving toward. And in his reflection's hand, the stone. He felt it before he heard it, the weight of it arriving in his actual palm, solid and warm, transferred by the mirror's own logic to the person who wanted it without wanting to use it. The stone was in his hand. He closed his fingers around it. Behind him, the quality of the room changed. "Give it to me," the voice said, and it was no longer calm.
Something old and cold and furious was surfacing through Quirrell's voice, the actual substance of Voldemort freed briefly from the performance of measured control. "No," Harry said. Quirrell moved. Harry turned. What happened in the next 30 seconds was fast and chaotic in the way that real fights are, without the clean choreography of practice, with the specific friction of someone who was desperate and had things Harry didn't and was using them without restraint. Quirrell's wand arm came up. Harry moved sideways, not away but into the angle, which was the counterintuitive positioning that Lupin had spent 6 months drilling into him, and the curse passed his right shoulder close enough to feel the heat. He cast 3 things simultaneously, not elegantly, not in the textbook sequence, and 2 of them were deflected and 1 of them wasn't, a binding charm that caught Quirrell's wand arm and locked it for approximately 2 seconds, which was enough. He used the 2 seconds. He put his hand on Quirrell's face. What happened then was something Harry hadn't predicted, hadn't calculated for, and hadn't understood until after, the specific property of his mother's blood protection, the sacrifice magic that lived in him since the night she died, meeting the soul fragment that lived in Quirrell. The contact produced something like a reversal, the magic that had been the loving protection of one meeting the dark distortion of the other, and the meeting was not neutral. Quirrell screamed. Voldemort's presence in the room became suddenly and violently unstable, and the temperature of the air dropped and the candles went sideways and Quirrell collapsed. Harry stepped back. He kept the stone in his hand. The room was very quiet. Quirrell was on the floor, and there was something leaving the room, not a person, not quite, but a presence, a darkness that moved through the wall in the specific directional way of something that had been displaced rather than destroyed. A retreating thing. Diminished but not ended. Not ended. Harry breathed. He noted this. Then he put the stone in his jacket pocket, checked that Quirrell was breathing, he was, shallowly, the body persisting after the inhabiting presence had departed, and walked to the door. Ron and Hermione and Neville were on the other side, all 3 of them in the posture of people who had been counting seconds and had reached 7 and been about to move. "It's done," Harry said. "Are you hurt?" Hermione asked immediately. "No." He took the stone out and showed it to them. "Quirrell's on the floor. He's alive. He needs Madame Pomfrey." Ron was looking at the stone with an expression that was equal parts wonder and relief. Neville was checking the corridor behind them with the practical caution of someone who had spent the evening doing useful things and wasn't going to stop now. "Voldemort's gone," Ron said. "From the building," Harry said. "Not from the world." He put the stone back in his pocket. "He'll come back. He'll find another way. This was always just time." Hermione looked at him. "So this, tonight, this wasn't ending it." "No," Harry said. "This was keeping the stone out of his hands and finding out exactly what he's capable of in that state. Both useful." He looked at the 3 of them, Ron with his direct, uncomplicated reliability, Hermione with her rapid processing intelligence, Neville with the quiet determination he was still learning to fully trust. "We need to tell Flitwick. Tonight." "Not Dumbledore?" Neville asked. "Flitwick," Harry said. "Dumbledore will find out. But Flitwick gets to know first, so there's a record of the facts before they pass through anyone who might adjust them." Hermione nodded immediately. Ron made the sound he made when something was both obvious and slightly outrageous. Neville just said, "Right," and turned toward the corridor. They went. Flitwick opened his office door at 11:30 at night with the expression of someone who had not been asleep and who was not surprised to find Harry Potter at his door, which suggested either that he'd been expecting something or that he was the kind of person who stayed awake on the theory that something might require his attention. "Come in," he said, looking at all 4 of them, and the look on his face when Harry put the Philosopher's Stone on his desk was the most completely unguarded expression Harry had seen him make. He held it for a moment. He set it down. He looked at Harry. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning." Harry told him. It took 40 minutes. Flitwick asked questions at the right moments, precise, pointed,
without skepticism but with the kind of rigor that meant he was building a complete picture rather than just receiving information. When it was done, he looked at the stone again and then looked at Harry with an expression that had moved through several things and landed somewhere that was both professional and personal and not easily categorized. "The hand contact," he said. "You didn't know that would happen?" "No," Harry said. "I know what it was now, the sacrifice magic my mother left. But I didn't know it would work that way." "It shouldn't have worked that way at 11, Flitwick said, quietly, and he wasn't criticizing, he was making an observation about magnitude. "The magic required for that kind of defensive response at that age," he stopped. "Your mother was exceptional." "Yes," Harry said. He said it the way he always said things about her, plainly, factually, with the specific weight of someone who has heard her voice and knows exactly who she was. Flitwick stood. He went to his fireplace and put his head into the emerald flames with the briskness of someone who had decided the next step and was executing it. Harry heard him talking to someone, two voices, low, the conversation lasting about 3 minutes. When Flitwick came back his face was composed and formal in the way it went when he was going to do something official. "Madame Pomfrey is going to the 3rd floor," he said. "I've informed Ragnarok through my personal Gringotts contact that the stone needs to be returned immediately. That will happen tonight." He looked at Harry. "Dumbledore will be informed of the events of this evening by me, personally, in the morning, with the full account as you've given it and with my presence during that conversation." A pause. "He will not hear it from anyone before then." Harry looked at him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Tell me next time you notice something like Quirrell immediately rather than spending 3 months observing it first," Flitwick said, with a precision that was not quite a reprimand and not quite a joke. "I was building the case," Harry said. "I know. Do it faster." He looked at the other 3. 10 points to Gryffindor each. "You'll find, Mr. Longbottom, that 10 points for practical herbology application is a perfectly legitimate allocation." Neville looked startled and pleased. "Get to your dormitory. All of you." They went. The morning after was a study in controlled weather. The castle knew something had happened, not in the way that students know, through rumor and breakfast conversation, but in the way the castle itself knew things, the ambient quality of its magic having shifted slightly the way air quality shifts after a storm has passed. The corridors were the same corridors. The Great Hall was the same Great Hall. But something in the texture of the place was different, lighter, and Harry noticed it and thought it was probably the castle recognizing that the second presence it had been hosting unknowingly was gone. Dumbledore's meeting with Flitwick happened, as promised, that morning. Harry wasn't there. He didn't need to be. He was at breakfast with Ron, who was eating with the focused application of someone who had been through an eventful night and had opinions about whether that was adequately reflected in the quantity of food on his plate, and Hermione, who had already written a 12-page account of the events of the previous night in careful detail because she was Hermione and this was what she did with significant experiences, and Neville, who was quietly feeding Trevor from his own plate with the calm authority of someone who has made peace with their personal circumstances. Harry was watching the staff table. Dumbledore arrived at 9, later than usual. He sat down and his expression was settled and warm and gave nothing away, which was itself information. He looked along the hall and found Harry, and Harry looked back, and the look they exchanged across the length of the Great Hall was a whole conversation conducted without words. Dumbledore inclined his head. A very slight acknowledgement. Not surrender, that was too simple. It was more like a player conceding a specific piece without conceding the game, and acknowledging that the piece was lost and the game was continuing. Harry held his gaze for a moment. Then he looked away, because he had a plate of eggs that needed attention and because looking away first was also something he did on purpose, the reversal of the version from the Ministry conference room. Not flinching. Just choosing. He thought about what came next, which was a long list and only getting longer. Pettigrew still at large and still being searched for. The investigation still open, the record still being written.
Sirius rebuilding himself with the specific patient difficulty of someone doing it right rather than fast. Lupin teaching at a distance and planning to teach here, Harry knew, when the defense position eventually opened, and it would open, it always opened, something Harry had filed as data without yet knowing all the reasons. Voldemort out in the world somewhere, diminished but purposeful, waiting. He was 11 years old. He was in the first year of 7 years at this school. He had 3 months of friendship with people who turned out to be exactly the kind of people he'd wanted without knowing how to want them. He had a godfather who was learning to come back to himself. He had a guardian who had his father's laugh in him. He had a verified record of everything that had been taken from him and done to him, filed in Gringotts and the DMLE and the Wisengamot and his own leather case, clean and complete. He had his parents' voices. He thought about his mother, find the people worth trusting. Trust them completely. He thought about his father, your power belongs to you. Every single piece of it. He thought about the stone in Flitwick's hand last night, on its way back to Gringotts, out of Voldemort's reach for now. He thought about Quirrell's face, the inhabiting presence withdrawing from it, the room going cold and dark and then quiet. He thought about his own hand and what had happened when it touched what it touched, the magic his mother had left him doing what it was made to do. He was extraordinary, the hat had said. He knew this not because the hat had said it but because he had spent 4 years becoming it, and the becoming had not been effortless or accidental. It had been work. His work. The work of a boy who had stolen his own mail from his uncle's jacket pocket and taken a train to London at 7 years old because the alternative was staying in a cupboard and pretending the lock on the outside of the door was the whole of the world. He was done with cupboards. He was done with locked doors. He was done with the particular smallness that had been arranged for him by a man who needed him small. He was at Hogwarts. He had people. He had 4 years of knowledge and a castle that moved its staircases for him and a goblin director who had used the word certain like it meant something and a head of the DMLE who read everything she was given and a guardian who had his mother's memories of him somewhere in his bones. He had a long way to go and the road was not simple and the people who wanted to shape him to their purposes were not done trying. But Harry Potter had never once, since a Tuesday in June 4 years ago, been the person other people were trying to make him. He finished his eggs. He looked at Ron. Do you want to go to the library after breakfast? Hermione found something in the restricted section about soul magic theory that I want to read before the end of term. Ron considered this. Will it be interesting or will it be like the goblin banking law thing? Significantly more interesting than goblin banking law, Harry said. Then yes, Ron said. Hermione looked up. I've already pulled the relevant volumes. Obviously, Ron said. Neville looked at all 3 of them over Trevor. Can I come? Yes, Harry said. You might find the herbological component useful. There's a plant that, I'm already interested, Neville said firmly, which was something he would not have said in September, and which was worth noting precisely because of that. Harry stood up. He picked up his bag. He slung it over his shoulder in the practiced way of someone whose bag always had the right things in it because they'd thought about what the right things were. He walked out of the great hall and into the castle's morning corridors, his friends at his back, the old stone walls warm with centuries of magic around him, and the whole long road of what came next laid out ahead of him like something not promised but possible, which was, he had decided, enough. More than enough. It was everything.